Faites appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Berlaud.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen. Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern. Madame le député Labbé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier. Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé. Monsieur le député Morel.
Présent.
Madame le député Lehegara. Monsieur le député Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves. Madame le député Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Ghost.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farner.
Présent.
Madame le député Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Joseph. Monsieur le député Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Coles.
Présent.
Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député Wall.
Présent.
Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf. Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet.
Présente.
Madame le député Jeune. Madame le député Miller.
Présente.
Madame le député Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Citoyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussissez au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple qui ont de plus de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions, mon nom, et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car à toi est la règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Malade.
Vous jurez que Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas résister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le député Southern.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Tadier.
Well, so Deputy Sadie has a hospital appointment this morning and will be here as soon as he possibly can. Can you be...
Very well. Excusez for the time being.
Madame le député Dublé.
So Deputy Dublé asked to be excused due to parental responsibilities as she is caring for her sick child.
Very well.
Madame le député Owls.
Défaut.
Monsieur le député Joseph.
Défaut.
Madame le député Jeune.
Sir, Deputy Jeune is away on State's business.
State's business. Les États sont constitués. Sure members will join me once again in welcoming His Excellency to the chamber this morning. And we now resume the debate on P109. And next to speak, Deputy Balash. Deputy Balash.
Sir, Deputy Farnham's report states that the aim of the proposition is to ensure that the government does not abandon the Overdale project without State's approval, and until such time as there is certainty that the multi-site scheme proposed by the Chief Minister and the Minister for Infrastructure in their report is a better option for Jersey than Overdale, both clinically and financially. The Deputy Farnham must know, sir, that if that is the aim, his proposition is completely unnecessary and a waste of the time of this Assembly. He knows that the government cannot abandon the Overdale project without the approval of the states. The resolutions referred to in the proposition remain in force until the states have revoked them, and the states will not revoke them until the Assembly is certain that the Chief Minister's scheme is a better option for Jersey than Overdale, both clinically and financially. There must be, a debate on this question before the Overdale scheme is laid to rest. And it may not be. It will be for the government to persuade us that the multi-site option is clinically satisfactory and financially less risky and better for Jersey. Will the government therefore be obliged to produce all the financial analyses referred to in the proposition? I think it is true that some of it will have to be produced, but that will be a matter of judgment for the government. If the government eventually recommends a 2 or 3 site option, which does not involve remodelling Westmount Road and the rest, why should we compel them to spend thousands of pounds on a financial analysis that is irrelevant to their conclusion? It makes no sense. If the decision is to press ahead with Overdale, then of course the costs of remodelling the roads may be relevant. But is that not a judgment for the government? It is the government which must persuade the Assembly. And I, for my part, am not prepared to authorise the wasting of one more penny on architects, engineers, consultants and experts than is absolutely necessary. If the government fails to provide the relevant information, there is a risk that it will lose the argument. Deputy Farnham does not need this proposition to gain the information he wants. It will almost certainly involve unnecessary expenditure and quite possibly delay. The Minister of Infrastructure has made it very clear that his officials have advised that the financial, clinical and medical analyses which Deputy Farnham has asked for cannot be produced within the very short timescale allowed. I am afraid that the Deputy's aim is political mischief. He is setting the government up to fail. That is not an appropriate resolution for the Assembly to adopt. I think, sir, that we must trust the government to produce the relevant information in the knowledge that if it does not, it is likely to fail. I hope, sir, that members will vote against this proposition. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's been a very interesting debate the last couple of days to see sometimes the creation of a reality which is then spoken around, which seems to happen a lot in this assembly. If we look back to the last project, sir, in the last assembly, there were so many issues over what the Overdale project meant. One of them over the road and so on and so forth, and things like superhighway was bandied around. And many people were opposed to that, myself included. I had real issues over what was necessary in order to gain access to Overdale. We also, as a party and as myself involved in some of the panels, had real concerns over the spend itself being one large tranche, which seemed to be an open cheque. And indeed, we voted to limit that funding in the debate itself, and I would still stick by that. However, those concerns were because of uncertainty. There was uncertainty over the future of the project, over what it meant, over the content. And I'll add this, sir. I am not a hospital designer. I'm not a clinician. I'm not somebody who knows about how to build a building. I am a healthcare user, as we all are. And at a time when we desperately need that, we want the best possible services available to us. And at that point, that's when you really don't care as to what happened, to how that hospital got there. You just want the building there so that you can access it and utilise it. And I think we need to remember that context as we move through this debate. But so one of the issues with the old project was this notion of there was information that wasn't given, there was uncertainty about cost, there was uncertainty about the future, there was uncertainty whether there was an analysis of that project being more successful than the old project of building on top of Gloucester Street, which we all, one of the first things we did in the old assembly was to go to presentations on that. And I had concerns about that presentation, sir, because they were talking about building in a way that they built in the UK. I think it was in Bristol, where there are 3 or 4 other hospitals that can be used, indeed a hospital across the road. And I didn't think that fitted this island because we have one place to build, and if we're going to build on top of it, that's going to be massively disruptive. So there were issues. But again, it was all about uncertainty. Now, we've come into a new assembly, and many seem to believe that their election was due to the fact that they opposed the hospital, it seems. I don't know if that's the case. For me, the things that were on the doorstep were much more widespread than that. They were about housing and genuine poverty and uncertainty in people's lives and how they're going to make ends meet and living wage and access to our healthcare and access to education that was needed, access to university, parking, roads, how much green space there was. There were so many different things that came across on the doorstep. And the overriding message was that just get on with it and don't spend too much money on the hospital. And that's a really important point that we need to be accessed. Now, speakers who've spoken in this debate so far have talked about, we can't be spending more money on finding out whether this is the better project. But so we've gone backwards. We're starting again. And we're going to have a much, much longer time for this project to be built. We have to remember that. Now, whether that's the right thing to do or not, I, be quite frank, sir, am still uncertain. There are benefits to all of the projects that have been brought forward. And at this point, if we were building, perhaps we'd be moving forward and we'd be having a different debate. How can we save that money? And I'm being cynical, sir, I still believe that there was an element of the government, if it was successful before, coming back later on and saying, oh, by the way, we can spend less money, we've saved you a lot of money, look how successful we were. But perhaps, sir, that's just my cynicism. But we have massive uncertainty. And the uncertainties I have with the new project are similar to the ones with the old project. And that's the key point in my mind. What's the final cost? We do not know. And we're told that we can't have a like-for-like comparison because we can't talk about those costs. So therefore, in my logical mind, I come to a conclusion as to how can we therefore say that we'll save money? Unless we have certainty on the costings going forward and the outcomes, we cannot end the project on the notion that we will save money, because we don't know what we're getting. Now, what this proposition asks for is a direct like-for-like financial analysis. Now, if that cannot be produced, then that's all the more power, because the old project didn't have it, or the old project didn't have certain facilities, all the more power to the elbow of a change for the new project. Because if we're coming up with a new hospital project, there is absolute certainty, and this is the services that will be provided, this is where they will be, this will be the cost long term, this will be what we will be able to access on island and off island, this is the way in which we will staff these things, these 2 or 3 or 4 site hospitals. Don't worry about that. Clinicians have had it explained to them, and they know the way they're going to work in this new healthcare system, and here's the healthcare model that will go with it. Absolutely fantastic. Coming back with that sort of information in comparison to the old thing will give this assembly a continuity, and I'll use that word that seems to be used so much at the moment, although I'm not so sure people understand its meaning, a consensus on where we want to go forward, which we've not had before. And we don't have that unless we have these sorts of comparisons. Look at the timescale. I do not believe that this has to slow anything down. What it will produce is more detailed, more useful, more richer evidence for the decision-making process in this assembly. And I was pleased to hear Deputy Balash state that we have to take a vote to end the project. Because the last thing we want to do is go down another road of there being a mistake in what we do with the hospital. And throw more money down the drain as we do it. Because this hospital project, I'm not sure when the completion date is now, I really have lost track of it. It's going to be at least 8 years. That's 2 more assemblies. Who knows who will be sat in this assembly at that time? Who knows who'll still be around, who made the decisions in the beginning, and then we come to the outcome. So what we need is a real clarity in what we are going to actually do. And at the moment, I'm afraid, the report that was produced did not have that clarity. And every time we've asked questions, and questions of the infrastructure minister has been, well, you know, we don't know yet, but we've got this plan, and we promise you it will be okay. And that's great, and I desperately, I want to believe that. I want to believe that we can build a much cheaper hospital with exactly the same facilities and the facilities that this island needs to look after its island. We all desperately want to see that, but we have not seen clarity in the evidence that that's what we've got. And there's this classic phrase of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And if we're not careful, that's what we're going to end up doing. And I wonder whether, to really stretch an analogy, whether what we need to be doing is checking the temperature of the bathwater before we do anything. And I wonder whether this proposition gives us an opportunity to do exactly that. A direct like-for-like clinical and medical analysis of the multi-site option approved Overdale project. Some people in this assembly have said, we cannot do that because it is not like with like. Well, that's really important that we come back to the assembly and make that clear. That we are talking about 2 different projects that are not comparable. That's fine. But let's make sure we've got the evidence for that. Let's make sure that we're actually looking at that. Because what we have is a clouding, a greying of areas as to what is going on here. And I got to say, I wasn't sure if I was going to say this, but I've got to say, the first words that were spoken to us from the consultant when we went up to the first presentation at the Society was that the government was elected on a mandate to end the hospital project. And I took on the consultancy after that. And I go back to what I said at the beginning when I stood up today. I believe that we were elected on much, much, much more than that. And you know, I've said before this Einsteinian quote of the theory determines what we observe. And we've got to be very, very, very careful that that's not what we're doing here. And this is not a step back. It's not an intrusion. It's not trying to put a blockage, I don't believe. I think what it will do is produce evidence. And I say to Deputy Farnham, he has to be prepared, as we all do, that it might not produce the evidence that you want. And if it doesn't produce the evidence that we want, part of me sort of hopes it doesn't. So that we can all come back here and say, do you know what? This is going to work. We know the costs, we know what we're going to get. Let's crack on with it. And then I can stand here and say, come on, get on with it. Let's move quicker. But at the moment, we're not certain. And there are genuine uncertainties. And as a St Helier deputy, I'm pleased to see the acceptance of the Constable of St Helier's amendment. However, we haven't discussed that with any new project as to what will happen to roads and traffic and transport if it's a two-site option, for example. And those comparisons need to be made. Because if you're going to have staff moving from one site to another, they're very likely to be driving from place to place, and it may increase traffic again. So those residents live in that area are going to have another set of concerns thrown at them. And they've been promised, well, it's the end, don't worry, we won't have the superhighway, we won't do this damage to the bowls club, we won't do the damage to the park. Great. But it might come with another set. And it's that lack of transparency that caused many of the problems in the first project. And if we have learnt nothing from that, it is that we're going to get back to square one again. So I would say the objection to this, I honestly don't understand as much as to say, if this project has the clarity, the depth, and the certainty that we're being told it has, it should hold up to this form of scrutiny, it should hold up to this form of analysis, and then it should come back to this assembly and give us a much richer set of data, information, and future ideas that we can make an informed decision. Then we can go and knock on people's doors and say, by the way, the reason I supported this is for this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. Here's the data, here's the information, we've been through the process. And then we won't have that huge gap, that chasm between ideas that we've had so far. So I would ask members to really carefully consider what this might provide for us. And if we do this properly, it will give us a proper analysis and it won't determine the outcome before we start. That's why I'm happy to support this proposition, which is not me deciding as to what is the best project so far. I want to know so that I can speak to the constituents in my constituency and say, the reason I made this, as your representative, this decision is for these reasons. At the moment, I cannot sit down and say, oh, this is a better project for these reasons, because I don't know what that is. And I think many of us are in that position. So I urge members, please don't dismiss this out of hand, whatever side of that argument that you've been on. Look at it carefully and think about what might be achieved from this and what might lead to a better decision-making process in this assembly. Because, sir, let's be honest, we all want to just get on with this now. We don't want to be talking about a hospital in the next election, whatever that may be. So thank you, sir. That's my piece. Thank you.
Very much.
May I lift the defo on Deputy Alves?
Yes, the defo is raised on Deputy Alves. Deputy...
Sir, sorry, may I also raise the defo on Deputy Ozef?
Yes, the defo is raised on Deputy Ozef. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Ferrier.
Thank you, sir. Last week, Deputy Rose Binet and I had the pleasure of spending some time with the Chief of Police, and primarily to talk about mental health issues in Jersey. And of course, whilst the Chief of Police is completely non-political, he pointed us towards a podcast, which I urge members, if I send the link around, to have a listen to. It's a half-an-hour podcast, and it's titled Too Big to Succeed. So this story is about a bridge in California. And if we substitute bridge for hospital and listen to the podcast, you will see just how much sense it makes. So the story is that there was an earthquake in California, not an uncommon event, and this particular bridge linked two great communities, two big cities, and unfortunately it was built on fairly soft foundations. So it was damaged and unusable. And the inhabitants of both of these communities were hugely inconvenienced by having to take an extremely long way round, in some cases to get to work, to visit friends or family in the other city. So the question was, do we repair the existing bridge or do we rebuild in another location? They took 25 years and billions of dollars to get to the eventual result. And the biggest obstacle in their decision making was the political process. Because just when they were at the point of making a decision, in his election campaign, Arnold Schwarzenegger, as the governor of California, suddenly said, we just don't want a new bridge, we want a world-class bridge, something to rival the Golden Gate. And the whole process got turned into another turmoil and pushed back once again. So if you do listen to the podcast, it is so interesting because there's a professor from Holland who looks at big projects around the world and finds out why they fail. And there is a common theme why they fail, big projects. And if you listen to the podcast, you'll see one of the main reasons why they fail. So interestingly, the solution for this particular bridge, when it did come into being, was to repair and to improve it aesthetically. So in some ways, Arnold Schwarzenegger did get a little bit of what he wanted because he had a more pleasing to look at bridge, but the two communities just wanted a functional bridge. And actually, when they arrived at the solution, it was driven by groups in the community who came together, who just explained why it was completely interrupting their lives so badly. So I would say, in conclusion, sir, to reject this proposition, no more delays. Let's give the public of Jersey what they need. Thank you, sir.
Conatava Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't intending to speak in this debate, but I reflected overnight and felt I should at least put on record why I will be supporting the Constable of St Helier and Deputy Farnham. I admit that I come as a supporter of the single-site hospital, and this will come as no surprise as I was part of the political oversight group in the previous assembly. However, now there appears to be three options. Proceed the already approved scheme, with or without the superhighway, or the current government's embryonic proposal on an assurance that, trust me, it will be okay. I will be failing my responsibility to Islanders if I did not pursue the level of detail required to make a reasonable judgment based on comparable appraisal of the options. It's claimed by some that figures required to make those comparisons possible did not exist in the single-site option. Well, fine. It can't be beyond the wit of man to produce some educated assessments for the purposes of comparisons. If this proposal fails, all the work of the last assembly and the millions of pounds of public money will count for nothing. If that is proved to be right, the right decision, then fine. But we need to see the evidence, something that the current review document falls well short on. This proposal simply asks us to put before the Assembly unbiased clinical, financial and timescale comparisons between the options, a document which compares apples with apples so that we can make properly informed decisions, not knee-jerk reactions. I'll leave it there, sir. Thank you.
Deputy Rose Binney.
So, having listened carefully to the debate, I can fully understand why members are looking to be provided with tangible facts in order to be able to come to an informed decision about the construction of new hospital facilities. However, I do not believe Deputy Farnham's proposition, further complicated by Constable Crowcroft's amendment, is the way to achieve this. It is simply impossible to complete the necessary consultation process, design and costing for a two-site hospital, including staffing, within 69 working days from the 2nd of January. I cannot comprehend why Deputy Farnham has stipulated such a timeframe and would ask if he could explain his reasoning for this in his summing up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I was able to follow the debate forensically yesterday. It's remarkable what little distraction you have when you're sat next to your live stream. And so I was reminded, it may seem like not immediately relevant, but it is to the debate, of a trip I took a couple of years ago to Shetland, which, as we might know, is the northernmost part of the British Isles and we're the southernmost. It wasn't Northern Ireland, I'm afraid, but it was a different part of the British Isles nonetheless. And I remember going there and seeing these small horses that they have for the first time, and they're remarkable little creatures, sir. And if I may be allowed to perhaps bend the exact embellish on my experience, I remember seeing one of these small horses in the field balancing a little tennis ball on its nose. And I thought, oh, that's remarkable, isn't it? I was fascinated by it. Spent quite a lot of time looking at it and thought, oh, I might like one of those myself. Until I went out the next day and it was still balancing the ball on its nose. And the day after, and I became slightly less impressed by it. And I think, unfortunately, we've got a lot of those little horses in this assembly, sir. They're called one-trick ponies, sir. Because all they go around, when you first see them, you say, oh, that's remarkable, I want one of those. And then after a couple of weeks, let alone 4 years down the line, you realise you're stuck with these little horses, and that little trick that they were able to convince you was so amazing was actually quite boring. And then you've got to deal with, of course, what happens the other end of the horse, which is not quite as interesting, sir. And you've got to deal with it for the next 4 years. And there's a more serious point, sir, because in this case...
I was, in fact, wondering if there was a more serious
in this case, I know that the Assembly is of high intelligence across the board. It's one of probably the most diverse assemblies we've had in many ways. So I don't need to tell them that I'm talking about a one-trick pony, which is what I saw in Shetland. I needn't have gone to Shetland to see that. I need to have only waited a couple of years for the election cycle. And it's even the case in this assembly when I've tried to talk to some new members, just not even about politics, but just say, how are you doing, how are you settling in? They only want to talk to me about the new hospital. We've got to get this new hospital built in this place. And then you dig below the surface. And the reason I make that analogy, of course, is because it's not just for 4 years that we have to deal with this. It's for the lifetime of the whole project. And as a colleague said, I listened to Deputy Mezek's speech, and he's quite right when he said there are lots of people who will give you an opinion. You could probably find as many opinions about where the hospital or the hospitals should go, because we're being told, and this is the other interesting part, that the proponents of the new scheme, which I'm neither for nor against, I want to see the facts and be able to compare them option for option. They can't even agree on whether it's a 2 or 3 site hospital. I mean, one of the first speeches we had yesterday was saying, oh, the 2/3 site hospital. Well, that's not a great start, is it? Is it 2 or is it 3? Or maybe it's going to be 3/4 by the time we get into it. You know, these are the levels of details we're looking at. And whilst it's quite correct that everyone might have an opinion about what the perfect solution is, and the perfect solution doesn't exist, it's easy to build a coalition against something, but it's not very easy to build a coalition for. And I think, therefore, that the analogy of the bridge that Deputy Ferry came up with is not the correct one. But we can't even build a road to the hospital in Jersey, let alone a bridge. And I don't think that the amendment of the Constable of St Helier in any way complicates this. I think it's a welcome amendment. It's been accepted, and it's been accepted by the move of this proposition. Great, let's have that. Let's look at the full costs that we have there, sir. As far as I'm concerned, this proposition, the reason that the bridge analysis doesn't work, I think, is because Deputy Ferry quite rightly talked about taking the community with us. And that's exactly what we don't have at the moment. We've got a completely divided community when it comes to the issue of the hospital. It was correct that it was a big election issue, but it was a big election issue where nobody gave a clear steer about what they wanted. They told us what they didn't want. They did tell us they were fed up with government. And it's not the previous government or the previous assembly that is holding this up. It's the current government that's come in and said, we've got a project which was shovel-ready. I want to know, and I think this is a question that does need to be looked at potentially by PAC, is who put the stop on getting the finance sorted? As soon as that decision was made by the previous assembly, the decision should have been taken to get the money sorted, to lock that low interest rate in, and to get the project started. And this idea that somehow we're going to have a better project, but a smaller project, to provide a world-class solution for the needs of the island, divided over 3 or 4 sites, which are 20% more expensive in the long term to run, and we don't have those long-term running costs, I think comes back to the point that Deputy Mezek made, that this is a political solution being pushed by a political government, and that's fine, that a government who have managed to get a majority in the election for their party, and they're pushing through whatever policies they want, that's fine, but I don't think they've got the mandate for it amongst the public. And I, as a member of the Assembly, like anyone in this Assembly, should be saying, I want to see both schemes compared like for like. And as Deputy Ward said a moment ago, it may well be that actually we end up going with the A Better Way project. Who knows? It may well be that we go with that hospital, because that's the best when we've compared all the factors taken into account. But it's only once we've compared those two, when that comes back to the Assembly, that we can all go to our constituents, whichever way they feel about the hospital, and some may be simply, just get it done, please. And when I hear constituents, certainly who are older, saying, resigned to the fact that they're never going to see the hospital, they say, it's never going to be built in my lifetime, I'm thinking, well, let's see what we can do about that. So, and the way we take people along is by comparing apples with apples, have the hard figures there, so that once the hard figures have been analysed, we can build a hospital for the community, which is going to be providing care. And then we can talk about what's in the hospital, not simply about where the hospitals go.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to stand after Deputy Tadia and his illustrative story of the greatness of Shetland ponies, sir, as I'm sure you appreciate. This, sir, I don't think is your first hospital debate, nor the first one that you've presided over. Unfortunately, nor is it mine, sir. And I say that because it is often instructive to understand how we have arrived at where we find ourselves today, because much has been said about that. And in some respects, this is a difficult debate for me, because in every other single hospital debate, I have voted to continue, because I accept that the hospital facilities that we currently provide healthcare services in need to be renewed. We need new hospital facilities, and we've had a number of reports which have quite clearly stated that. But we also, and this has been part of Deputy Farnham's argument, acknowledge that the work that the new Health Ministry has undertaken in light of the review of hospital services need transformation of how we provide those services. And whilst there is a connection between building and services, they are also discrete and need to be dealt with in that manner. So in the Chief Minister's 100-day plan, she was very clear that a review of the current hospital proposal needed to be undertaken. And whilst, of course, Deputy Ward is right that islanders had many priorities that they talked to candidates about during the election, it is hardly, in my experience, accurate to suggest that the hospital was not an important point of conversation on the majority of doors and in the minds of the majority of islanders. And they were indeed confused about how we had got to the point of supporting a proposed hospital of a extremely large cost of £800 million. So they were frustrated at the £800 million, let alone what became apparent during the course of the review and the course of advice from expert officials about what that particular hospital would cost now. Now, so in light of, and the Constable of St Helier is right, it is important that we deal with the issues and not the person or people involved. And I want to step back and do exactly that. It is fair to congratulate Deputy Farnham, then Senator Farnham, for chairing a hospital group that managed to deliver a planning application on a hospital, and that application was approved. That had not been delivered prior to that point, and we know how that happened. There was a change to the Ireland plan that allowed the independent inspector to recognise the democratic position of this assembly and therefore accept that a hospital could be given planning permission on that site. But we know during the last 4 years, the government spent at least 2 of those, if not more, dealing with COVID. And it was that COVID time that ultimately led to delays in progressing the Our Hospital project in the timely manner that some would have wished. But if we review the start of this year, sir, it was apparent to, I think, all that there was economic difficulties across Europe, there were supply line difficulties, and there was an energy crisis, most of which can be traced back to the war in Ukraine. That, of course, led to high levels of inflation. And so no matter how much wishful thinking we might now have, the current proposed and agreed hospital is not deliverable within the budget envelope, nor the finance model that had been previously agreed. And I think, sir, that Deputy Farnham in his opening comments accepted that. He came up with many ideas about how those hurdles could be got over. And I'm grateful that the chair of the scrutiny review panel also accepted that, and accepted for the, I think the first time I've heard it, that there is no ideal hospital site. Now, sir, we've been, or the government was criticised by one speaker earlier, that the Treasury Department, in their view, should have gone to the market to take a bond to deliver the hospital at Overdale. That despite, sir, having a contract price and any certainty. That, sir, would have put unnecessary risk onto the taxpayer. But that same speaker will remember, sir, that the last Assembly gave permission for the government to take a £500 million bond to repay pension debts. It was also, sir, apparent to me prior to the election that there was no longer, because of changing interest rates, a pressing need to pay off that pension debt. It would have been far more sensible to have retained that borrowing and to have allowed flexibility in the use of that borrowing to an incoming government. But the previous decision makers did not accept that. They wished to repay the pension debt, and therefore that flexibility was taken away from the incoming government. The economic situation has changed dramatically from the time that the previous Assembly agreed that the hospital at Overdale could be delivered, as I say, within that envelope of 800 million that most islanders that I spoke during the election found unacceptable anyway, nor could it be funded in the way that had been previously considered. So it would have been wrong for this government to have done anything other than do the review that the Chief Minister outlined in her 100-day plan. And that review has been undertaken with expert advice from an individual who has built hospitals in various situations. And that, I think, is something, in the words of Deputy Balash, that this Assembly should say today by rejecting this proposition and later this week by supporting the amendment to the government plan, should say to the Infrastructure Minister that this is an expert report that suggests, and from all of that expert experience, that savings can be made and the hospital can be delivered in a way which largely mitigates the risk of one site with one major developer. And I'll come back to that as well. So I think, sir, if I cast my mind back, if I can ask you to do the same, sir, you remember a similar debate in 2018 when I was roundly criticised by the incoming government. And we now have a new constable in St John, but it's worth referring to the comments of his predecessor, accused me, sir, of not being able to organise a drinks party in a distillery. I know, sir, that I have never, you've never been to a gorse party, but sir, those that know me best would doubt that greatly. In actual fact, they often tell me they don't need anything more to drink. After that chastisement was the alluring image that the individual had first-hand information that a hospital could be constructed by a firm resident in a country to the south of us, for £90 million. And on that alluring promise, the incoming Assembly in 2018, because there was no planning permission in place, changed tack entirely. If that's the situation that we were to find ourselves in today, sir, I would not be voting against Deputy Farnham. But it is not. We have an expert with decades of experience of building hospitals who has looked at what is currently on the table and, because of the changing economic situation, has said there are many ways that you can deliver excellent healthcare facilities to islanders, which the government is committed to doing, and you can save money and get it back within and below the envelope. But most importantly, in these difficult economic times, you can deliver those healthcare facilities in tranches and in stages. And that is critically important because it mitigates the risk of going for one site and one developer, where overheads are excessive and risk is not mitigable. And the reason I say that, sir, is because we know that the work that was done with the previously preferred design and delivery partner, and I hope that Deputy Farnham will confirm this when he sums up, was not, they were not able to deliver a contract price within a reasonable budget. And we know that in the current economic climate, fixed cost contracts for major projects are virtually now undeliverable, unless the client is prepared to accept that the risk will fall with them. The whole reason that clients have moved to fixed-term contracts is so that you can share the risk between the developer, those providing the contracts, and those for whom the service or building is being provided. But because of high inflation, because of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and all of the other known factors, it is not possible. So the alternative is that this Assembly presses on with the hospital at Overdale, and I don't detract from anything that others have said. We will not be able to deliver it within the contract price. It will be around £150 million more, and that's what it was a couple of months ago. It will be even more now. And the whole reason of going initially with a large developer of mitigating the risk is now gone out of the window. That risk would sit with taxpayers. And I do not believe for a minute that this Assembly nor Islanders would wish me to sign any contract or take on any funding or borrowing mechanism which had open-ended, unmitigable risk sitting in the lap of the taxpayer. We all know about capital projects, which have got out of control and gone over budget. We just could walk into the Royal Square and ask that question of any islander, and they would mention one off the top of their head. If we continue, and if we say no to the Infrastructure Minister, don't do the extra work that's required, then we know that is where we would be. So I'm running out of time. I just want to deal with the road issue. The current hospital planning permission requires that road, and yet now Deputy Farnham is asking us to go off and do a piece of work which doesn't have planning permission. That can't make sense, sir. It is irrational. It's got to be the wrong way to go. There's also comments have been made about the purchase of Kensington Place. He'll see from the amendment that there is a valuation of 60 million. We'll be asking members to support that. What Deputy Farnham is asking for is not deliverable. It is not deliverable in the time frame. It doesn't mean that that project is totally off the table. What it does mean is that members are asking the Infrastructure Minister to go away and do the work that is in the report, says eminently feasible and is deliverable for less. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Any other members to speak on the proposition? Honourable Brillard.
Thank you, sir. Like some states members, and has been alluded to earlier, I've sat through debates over the implementation of large projects. I've sat through rescindment motions, and I refer to the construction of our energy from waste plant, which was completed on mine, the then Deputy Lewis's watch in 2010. We got caught, sir, by global events, and the culprit was a massive change in interest rates, which meant the project cost an additional £5 million. I'm making the point, sir, that once again, we have no control and never will have any control over global events. And this is exactly the situation we have at this time. The Farnham iteration, if I may call it that, of a hospital is no longer affordable. From the point of view of not only borrowing the funds originally proposed, but also from the point of view that those sums, as proposed, will no longer, due to global events, be will allow us to deliver a hospital as we wish. I sat through, sir, the former Deputy Labby's rescindment of the Gloucester Street proposals in 2018, and this was a brilliant theatrical performance, but in my view was misdirected. I'm sure, sir, that there are several members here today who regret supporting that proposition. It certainly cost the island dear. Deputy Ferry, sir, made some very good points earlier. We're not good at managing large projects. I'm keen, like I believe most islanders, that we need to move on in a way that will see a hospital built without further delay. Deputy Farnham, sir, is absolutely right in that costs should be examined. But, sir, we've already examined every detail and in inordinate depth. We just cannot keep going over the same ground. The public are sick and tired of it. The scrutiny panel, of which I'm a member, is also right in that costs are not clear. I would add, sir, that whilst the panel is dominated by a certain party, but as an independent member and with due respect to my colleagues on the panel, I have no obligation to toe the party line, so I may not join them in their voting direction. We are all quite rightly risk-averse, but there comes a time when we have to make a business judgment, and this is exactly where we are now. The previous proposals failed, sir, because Deputy Farnham failed to read the room. He failed, sir, to appreciate the impact of the proposed highway to the hospital in the sky, is what it seemed like. He failed to appreciate that there was a need to get spades in the ground before the elections, with the result that we find ourselves in the present situation. My inclination, sir, is that the proposal from government are the right way to go. It may have to be a piecemeal project to make it affordable, but at least that will make it achievable. Dealing with a project in bite-sized chunks is the way to deal with this in an island where we just can't bring in large amounts of labour and accommodate them to the detriment of local people. Let us build this structure with on-island construction firms with local labour. I urge members not to let this wrecking proposition have traction and delay and possibility of delivering, and give Jersey the possibility of delivering this hospital without further procrastination. The Chief Minister will know, sir, that I've been sceptical about moving away from the former proposals, but having seen the report, I'm convinced we have to go in the direction proposed by the government, and I therefore cannot support this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Colin. Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I want to start by quoting Leslie Nielsen, if I may, in the fact that when asked references a hospital, he said it's a tall white building over there, but we don't have time for this right now. And it's true, a hospital is simply a building. We've got plenty of buildings, in fact, and many buildings can be used for many things. In fact, part of our current hospital is formerly a prison. So it shows how buildings can be adapted and changed, and so can plans. The important thing to remember on this, though, is for a hospital is what goes on inside the building that's important. Through the clinical staff, the equipment that's provided, the maintenance and continuing maintenance of these buildings. And we talk about the number of sites, and I've been thinking about this as well. Presently, I believe we already have more than 5 sites when you take in the General Hospital, Overdale, the 2 sites at St Saviour's Hospital being Clinic Pinnell and Orchard House. You then have 5 Oaks, which has our procurement for hospital purchasing site, plus the sterile cleaning unit, and also a site in St Peter's for the catering to be provided. So we're already covering on multiple sites. So actually, so why haven't we got the costings of maintaining all these sites? Why is there no facilities management costs? Why is there no staffing costs? Why is there no information and details about how much money we could either save or be spending more if we were going to 1 site or 2 sites? So it is considerably about lack of detail. And then when I look at the report that was produced for this, and I counted up the non-committal verbs which are actually in that document, there's 267 non-committal verbs of might, should, could, may, possibly. But there's only 156 affirmative verbs of will. So is that report in itself very committal to actually telling us that we will save money? Simple answer is we do not know. Because it might be the fact that, yes, we'll save £150 million in building a hospital, but actually it might cost us £5, £10 million more to maintain these sites over a single site. So in fact, all those savings we could make in the building will be eaten up within 10 years. So then where is actually the savings? So then we're going to start spending more money, which may restrict the facilities and the further services that we want to produce in these 1, 2, 3, 4 sites will actually be reduced because we can't afford them. So actually, the requirement from Deputy Farnham's proposition here will provide us some more clarity and some more detail to make sure that not only can we fund the building itself, but we can actually fund the services which are run within these buildings. I am not committed to either. I would like to see what actually saves the island the most money, not just in the short term in building, but in the long term, so we can actually supply the services a hospital actually requires. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Honourable Greville.
Sir, I would like to impart the views of my electorate in the parish of Greville. I was met on many occasions on the doorstep by individuals asking the same question. They asked me, what do you think about the hospital project? And I turned it back. I said, what do you think? And they were angry, sir. They were frustrated, and many said betrayed. They felt betrayed by a chamber that would spend so much money on consultants. That money is not water under Deputy Malcolm Ferry's bridge. but it could have paid for so much more in our society. It could have paid for perhaps a new mental health facility. It could have paid for perhaps a new oncology unit. It could have reduced our health waiting lists, sir, and it could have done a great deal more good. They wanted a review into the hospital project, and they wanted, sir, somebody to take on this mantle and take it forward and have a new look at it. And I've got every faith in Deputy Tom Binet and his department. That gentleman, sir, turned farming around on its head. He turned it from a cottage industry into an industry fit for the 21st century. And I have every faith in him, sir, and I'm going to oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you much, Colin Tarbes. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No. Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. Now, during the election, I was in a position where already there was 2 hospital selection sites that I wanted, and they were actually rejected in prior processes, sir, that we had gone through with previous assemblies. Now we are in this position, 10 years on, and yet again, we are going to go through a potential 4th process. Now, one of my concerns has actually been in terms of our legislature and the turnaround that we've seen in terms of the amount of politicians that have been leaving the Assembly and the amount of new politicians that are coming into the Assembly. Now, okay, sir, there is a new directive this term. And of course, we have seen the report that was released a couple of months ago to us as members. And we did have a look at the report, and of course, sir, there was not a clear enough appraisal of the operational costs. I think this is a concern that I do have. However, sir, it also must be noted, when I did ask a written question, the coupon on the bond for the hospital was 4.62% on the 24th of October. So again, sir, the coupon rate will change. It's in a market. And again, it's becoming very expensive. And that is the big concern that I do have, because we have continued to delay. And of course, when we are going to be looking at the 3 or 4 options that we do have in terms of the operational costs, in terms of the hospital sites that we will have to be operating for islanders, it's also going to be very costly outside of the boroughing, whatever the boroughing will be when we do go to market. And I think that is also something that has not been mentioned, it's not been articulated. Because so far, I think, yes, most of the electorate have actually been very dissatisfied with Overdale. And rightly so, I understand in terms of the height and the complexities, and also in terms of what is actually in place within the building itself. But, sir, I have to say, I do understand why many members have actually been sitting on the fence, because actually it is very difficult to make this decision, because moving forward, we have already depleted stocks over 100 million in terms of the government's expenditure, and now we are being asked to expend even more. We have already spent 43 million in the last 3 years on consultants, and potentially we are going to do that once again, and potentially even more. So I think we do need to be very decisive, I think, moving forward, and I do believe that it's probably best that we do go ahead with the proposed option that Deputy Tom Binet is proposing. And the reason being is because I do view that the public do actually support this. And I have to be listening to my electorate. And I think that's a really important thing. I have been in dialogue with members of my electorate, and I think as well with the climate changing so rapidly since June, it's made it very difficult. I think had we gone to the market in June, yes, we could have actually agreed a borrowing. It would have been at a low interest rate, and actually it would have been very cheap in the longer term, in say 20, 30 years' time. But the case is, if we go to market now, it's going to be very expensive. And it means, sir, that as a government, we'd have to be looking at potential tax proposals. We'd also be having to look at how we're going to be depleting our stocks in terms of the government, and also when we need to be looking at the departments that we are running. Where would the cutbacks be made? And there'd have to be very extensive cutbacks as well. But I will have to also reinforce to members that, yes, there is a potential that the free site option could potentially be more expensive as well. And I think that's really important that we are honest and frank about that, because let's not just say, well, it's going to be cheaper. It might be more expensive. And it's important, sir, as a member of the legislature, I took my affirmation and I have to be very clear and articulate that message for all fellow members to hear and also for my electorate. So thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think actually this debate is very healthy, and it's really positive to see and to understand that members of this Assembly want information. They want to take an evidence-based decision. And I think that's a healthy indicator for islanders. They can have confidence in this Assembly and its approach, which is, I'm afraid to say, a distinct difference from the last Assembly. But, of course, if we consider the format of the last government, out of the 21 members of that government, the public only returned 6 of them to this Assembly, which I think shows what they thought of their actions, activities, and the result of 4 years of their government. But I don't wish to look back too much in this debate, but I do think as we need to progress forwards, it is important to consider how we got here slightly. The rescindment vote has been described already this morning as something that was full of triumphant hyperbole that swayed the Assembly of the time, yet it had very little substance to it. And it certainly did not have the facts that this Assembly are looking for. That decision by the Assembly was then followed by a report, sir, that was not delivered by an expert, which is what this government has produced to the Assembly. It was written by a States member, and that has been referred to. Then there was a site selection process. The public felt huge disquiet at the 5 sites that were proposed and brought forward. And sadly, although an amendment to that site selection process was debated, the debate was then closed. And I think that was quite a sad moment for democracy, that we did not have a proper debate on that. Indeed, the Assembly just progressed down a road that it was being pushed along on the basis of very little fact, if any, and no evidence whatsoever. It took the previous government over 3 years to get to an outline business case. They published their outline business case in a report in July 2021. And I think that is really important for members to remember and to hold in their minds as they consider what's being asked of the government today. Because albeit it is right to ask for evidence and for information, it has to be in an ordered fashion, and it has to be practical and achievable and not too costly. We've already spent a vast amount of money getting to this stage, and Deputy Ward is absolutely right. The public have many worries and many concerns, and they want to see a government that is using public money wisely and delivering future facilities, not only for us all today, but for future generations as well. And so that means having a sustainable, pragmatic approach to spending public money, in particular on major projects. When I stood for election, I made it very clear that I did not want to plunge islanders into unnecessary debt that would impact upon future generations and our ability to fund our existing services, and in particular, sir, our education and our healthcare services, which are absolutely critical to the running of our dear island. The Overdale project, it has been suggested, maybe shovel ready. But as the Treasury Minister reminded us, it is simply unaffordable and unachievable in the current economic circumstances. As Deputy Balash said, it would be wrong to spend to continue spending without the commitment of the Assembly. And so that is what we want to do. We briefed scrutiny some time ago now and explained that we wanted to go to the Assembly to give scrutiny proper time to scrutinise, and then for the Assembly to be able to vote on the direction of travel, to have your authority as an Assembly so that we could continue with a hospital project that is pragmatic, achievable, affordable and appropriate for our island needs as we go forward. And then, sir, we would be able to continue to spend on further information and evidence and consultants as will be required over time. But we wanted to have the endorsement of this Assembly before progressing to that stage. And I'm afraid that's exactly where we would be put in a compromised position, sir, if the Assembly were to adopt Deputy Farnham's proposition today. And so I urge members to support the current direction of travel, to enable us to move forward and deliver a sustainable, appropriate and affordable solution, but not to tie the hands by supporting Deputy Farnham today. Thank you.
Very much, Chief Minister. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. It's a central facet of the Council of Ministers' arguments that we need to reassess the hospital plans due to the funding model. The original funding model would no longer apply. I'm surprised by this. Does the Treasury Department not consider and plan for investment market volatility over long-term borrowing? Is there a lack of forward planning? Also, it's been suggested that the new plans will be less expensive, but with a reduced budget, does that mean we will not get all the services required? The parity of mental health services, for instance. So many uncertainties remain. So my main point is this. I want to remind members what we are voting for, not whether the Overdale site is best or the new multi-site plan. What we need to decide is whether we have sufficient information to decide which is best. I don't have sufficient information about the new plans, and therefore I will be supporting the proposition.
Thank you very much. Deputy Lewis.
Thank you, sir. So members, I hope, will be familiar with the phrase that goes along the lines of don't fix something that isn't broken. For generations, Islanders have used the General Hospital and Gloucester Street, the Parade, Kensington Place on that site. And they've used it as a General Hospital and got very used to Overdale being the recuperation and recovery site with some outpatients. But for the last 4 years, we've had a government determined to break that and to fix something that wasn't broken. And to my mind, that was extremely unfortunate. So to plagiarise that phrase that I started with, rather than not fixing something that isn't broken, I would urge members this morning not to waste any more time and money trying to fix something which is irrevocably broken. The plans for Overdale, the business plan for Overdale approved by the last Assembly cannot be built out. That plan is now broken. We need to consign it to where it needs to be. We need to reject this proposition and move on. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Kovac.
Thank you, sir. So I want to state that on doorsteps, people were mainly arguing the delay in actually starting a hospital and not having even a brick put on the ground. Sorry, bit nervous, sir. But they weren't arguing as much the cost as much as the wasted money and the time until now. and they just wanted to get it done already. Deputy Ferris was suggesting refurbishment on the site. At the same time, Deputy Tombine said that in the PAC hearing that it was going to be a completely new build on the current site. So it seems that not even the government is consistent with what they're saying. Another thing to mention, the additional services that Deputy Barbara Ward and Deputy Howell spoke about being missing in the existing plans are unlikely to be provided in a reduced size project with a reduced budget. As Deputy Feltham mentioned, the Treasury Green Book guidance states that when appraising options, the existing project should be compared to other options, even if it's considered to be not viable. I find it interesting that Deputy Gorst completely ignored Deputy Feltham comments about Treasury Green Book. I was expecting him to try and prove it wrong. Related to the timing to produce an outline business case, that should be doable, as the government have said that where possible they will reuse the previous work. To come back to the recent review, the consultant used to do the review has confirmed that all he was hired for was to look at affordability of the project, nothing else, and that's what he did. The government also confirmed they haven't assessed the further cost of running a multiple-site hospital and the clinical cost of this. And there are big worries, and the cost of this is a great one as well. The operational cost ongoing and after is still a big part of that cost, and that's being ignored. I had on the streets also a consultation during the pop-up stands in town, a member of the health staff from the front line saying they haven't been consulting in this review, just some of their managers, but they are not the ones dealing with the day-to-day work in the hospital, but them, and they find the multiple sites would be bringing much more hassle and much more cost not considering their review report. And therefore, sir, for all this lack of details in the government review, I'll support Deputy Sparna's proposition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Farner to respond.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And can I, of course, start by thanking all members who have spoken in this important debate. Sir, and I think I'll just pick up on the last speaker, sir, who is absolutely quite right about the mood on the doorstep, because we've heard a lot of rhetoric about what was said on the doorstep, and of course it's easy for us to say what we heard on the doorstep. We can, if we want to, make it up as we go along, but of course there is some innuendo that if you're to go to a doorstep and say, what do you think of that awful hospital expensive plan of Deputy Farnham's, and it's all awful and we should stop it, people are often going to agree with you. Of course, so when I knocked on the doors, it was generally lots of other important issues, namely providing housing for our young people and the concerns about the increase coming up in the cost of living. And when hospitals were, the hospital was bought up, so 9 times out of 10, it was to say, will you all just please get on and build it? And Constable St. Peter will testify to that, sir, because he and I did a number of doors together. And that was it, sir, getting on with it. And just for the record, I did not shy away from the hospital campaign during my campaign as the Chief Minister and other members in the district that I stood in, sir. We had a very, very strong field of candidates in that district. At every opportunity, sir, and in my manifesto, I promised to continue the work and to deliver a hospital on time, sir, and within budget. And I still got elected. So saying otherwise, sir, saying that the Chief Minister and others have, who did poll exceptionally well, and congratulate her for that I got elected on the back of stopping the hospital, I think is not entirely true. Deputy Binet, sir, said that this proposition, if accepted, would add another layer of financial information and additional running costs, sir, and that is simply not correct. The government have all of the information, if not all of the information, most of the information, to be able to do this work, because they're using the same cost consultants who are very good. And I'm not just suggesting they do more work on their scheme, sir, on their proposition for a multi-site hospital, sir. I'm suggesting that they take this opportunity to do some more work on the Overdale project. The Overdale project presented a functional brief, which was carefully constructed, sir. Of course, it's not a perfect document. There's more work to do. When big projects like this are put together, the work is always evolving. It also produced a good outline business case, and I know some members have tried to say it wasn't that good scrutiny, had some negative things to say about it, but also, if I remember rightly, the scrutiny review also said some positive things about it. It was a good outline business case, and it was as far as we could go with the information we had at the time. And bear in mind, sir, we got to and completed REBA Stage 3, that's the Royal Institute of British Architects, that's the 8 stages of a build that is followed in a project. Item 3 is where we are now with planning position, REBA Stage 4, which is where the government should be going next, which was the technical design and all of the detail. That is finalising the detail of the layout of the hospital, exactly what's going inside it, what services are going to go where. And we've had a lot of talk, and I'm afraid to say misinformation about the hospital, the new hospital, omitting certain things, sir, because it's completely up to this new government and the health minister and the new and the health department what goes into the hospital and where they put it. And the hospital is designed to be flexible to do just so that. So this talk, sir, of things missing, and there is one exception to that, which I'll come to in a minute. It is quite frankly not helpful, sir. And it's that because that hospital is built and it is big enough to put whatever we want and more into it. For example, and I have to say the Deputy Barbara Ward and Deputy Howell, who I have a great deal of respect for both of them and their medical knowledge. Deputy Ward, sir, nursed my dad at the end of his life. And I know he would want me to thank you for doing that. But we are, on one breath, though, we are being told that the Overdale Hospital is far too big. And in another breath, we're told it's too small to contain all of the services we need. Somebody's in approval with me over there, so I'm not sure who's stamping their foot, but it's nice to hear it now and again. Yet, sir, the proposal for the multi-site option is 10,000 square metres, approximately smaller than Overdale. So how are we going to get all of these services that are missing into a far smaller estate? That's just one of the questions, sir, and that's one of the questions that I would like to be answered in the questions I ask, sir. For example, rehabilitation. The previous political oversight group for the hospital, in which some members here remain, sir, were absolutely clear with the team at Health that rehabilitation was to be included in the campus. And at that time, one of the 4 wards was to be dedicated for that purpose. And of course, as I said before, whether that goes in or not, or wherever it goes, whether it be Overdale or in a multi-site solution, will be entirely up to the government and the health team and the minister who are putting it together. So, and of course, that information that has been perpetuated by certain members, by the certain lobbying groups there, and they're quite entitled to give their opinions, but that's quite frankly what they are, sir. And unfortunately, that information being continuously put out there, the continuous discrediting of the Overdale scheme, sir, has, I think, caused concern and alarm amongst islanders, sir, especially the older members of our community, who say this can't be right. We can't, but it's not based on facts, sir. It's based on the perceptions of some people. And I know the sort of hospital I would rather be treated in, sir. I would rather be treated in a hospital that is designed and advised by clinicians and medical professionals, sir, not one that's designed by politicians and lobby groups. The government saying this simply can't be done is utter nonsense in the timescale, sir. I too have spoken to officers. I still do speak to officers and former colleagues. And I seek guidance and advice, and I seek clarity, sir, when it is necessary. And every officer I have spoken to who have worked on the project thinks it is doable within the timescale because most of the information we need exists. And I do not expect a forensic line by line comparison, sir. A good, fairly high-level comparison would suffice because that's what this assembly needs to point in the direction. And you never know, sir, if the comparisons come out strongly in favour on all aspects of what the government is proposing now, I might well change my mind, sir. But I doubt that will happen because we see in front of us, sir, some ideas that are completely unevidenced and completely speculative. And even by doing the simplest of calculations, it's pretty clear that the multi-site option is going to cost more to build and to run, sir, than the Overdale site. But of course, once again, we have to be careful because we find ourselves in danger of putting money before health and before people's lives. I'll touch on some of the speeches, if I may. Deputy Barbara Ward also said that Overdale is a wonderful site and has served us all well. Of course it is. It is a wonderful site, and that's part of the reason why it was selected, because of its location. And the fact that it's not a new hospital going up there, an extension to an existing hospital that we were planning. And again, some of the services she rightly alludes to, and all the services that Deputy Howe and Deputy Ward mentioned as not being present, we must have. That must be part of the new hospital. It has to be part of it. And there is space to do that when we get to the REBA stage 4 and the final design stages. Of course, there is one exception, and that is the hydrotherapy pool. And we did say to the hospital team, they must find space for that hydrotherapy pool on the hospital campus, but they didn't get around to doing it. So that's a challenge I'll throw back to the new government, but I agree we should have a hydrotherapy pool there. But of course, there was an argument at the time around the care model, and the care model would be putting more facilities such as that into the community. And the pushback from health professionals was that it doesn't have to be on the hospital campus. That could be somewhere else in the island, perhaps somewhere different. I want to talk briefly about the concern of some ministers and members that the Overdale project was lacking some information, especially in relation to workforce management. Well, that is entirely correct. Councillor Sir John has brought that up. And of course, in fairness to him, he did bring that up regularly during the scrutiny process. And we were always clear at that stage. And I've had a separate conversation with the Health Minister at a meeting we had recently at Maritime Health. She might remember when she asked me the question about this. And I said, it's impossible really to put a workforce management structure in place at this stage, because we're not sure the final interior design and layout of the hospital. We're not sure that the healthcare model, which I think is currently being evolved by the Minister right now. We're not positive of the healthcare model we're going to have. So it is almost impossible to put a staffing structure in place. And over the life of any new hospital, the staffing structures will evolve and change. But we always worked on the premise that a single site would be far more productive, financially advantageous and clinically advantageous to operate. That is the premise that I've always worked on, that the Air Hospital Group has always worked on, with single site versus multi-site. And I don't think anybody can argue with that. But we still need to do the comparison. Even clinicians have said it's much easier for us to work on a single site. One clinician said, if I worked on a single site and didn't have to travel, I could perhaps do 1 or 2 more operational procedures in a day. Now that's got to be a massive boost to the productivity of a hospital. And of course I mentioned Northern Ireland, where Deputy Binet and the team went to. And of course, whilst I know they are having their difficulties, members will also know, if they look at Appendix 2 and they look at the 5 hospitals were visited, I think 2 were acute, 1 was a cancer based, and 2 others specialised in other areas. So they have a multi-site hospital infrastructure in Northern Ireland. And although the distances are far greater, the principles are the same. When you have surgeons and staff having to travel between hospitals, you're not going to get as good an outcome. And if members do take a look at the dossier that I put out there and the research that's been done, that is behind some of the staffing challenges they're having, the fact that staff are having to travel between hospitals, which is causing difficulty. And the principles are the same, although the distances are much smaller. Deputy Gardner wanted to know why I changed my position on the road. Well, I haven't necessarily changed my position on the road. I never really had a position on the road. I was going to make some quip about a U-turn, but that was probably a bit too much. The New Hospital Group didn't say, we'd like a new road, let's put a new road in. We were advised, following a consultation on traffic and planning, that a new road would be necessary to provide uninterrupted 24/7 access to the hospital. And it wasn't felt that the current Overdale Road was able to do that because of some of the very tight turns, which could cause problems with larger vehicles meeting. That is why the new road, sir, and I smile at the use of the word superhighway. If you want to see a superhighway, go to the United States or China. They've got some great superhighways. We've got a 2-lane road. The current road is 2-lane. The new road is 2-lane. Superhighway is a rather cynical, but I must say effective term used by the opposition, because it certainly seems to have worked. And I said, if there was a change in the views of planners, if Overdale could be achieved without such changes to the road, then I would support that. I will support whatever is achievable to deliver the right hospital solution. But I thank the Constable for his amendment, and I don't think it complicates the proposition, because we sort of know now what all the road, not just the Overdale Road, but the other changes to the road networks and the acquisition of land costs. We know that. They've got all those figures now. So actually there's no extra work that exists. We're just quite rightly asking to show an option with and without. And actually, if we can do it without, it will save us a considerable sum of money. Not 40 million that some people think the Overdale Road's going to cost. The Overdale Road, I think, out of all of the costs of land acquisition and highway changes is 18 million at the last count. So I hope that is clear. Deputy Feltham, who is always concise, brought us back on track, as did other members, about what we were really talking about here, and that is the level of detail needed to proceed. Deputy Ozif and other members questioned why we didn't take the borrowing out at the time. And I would have preferred to do that. And indeed, we did push the Treasury to do it. I do remember having a number of conversations with the Treasurer. But actually, we couldn't borrow for a project that didn't have planning permission, was the advice received. We wouldn't get the right bond rate, and it would be harder to achieve. So the advice from Treasury and officers was to wait till we got planning permission to do that. And that's the advice. Not sure that I agreed with that, but that was the advice we received from the Treasurer of the States. And of course, planning consent was due to be sought and obtained in Q3 of 2021, sir, but because of delays to the process, usually political delays, which is the want of such a project, we had a delay of up to 4 months, because on an amendment of Councillor St Helier, we had to come back and approve the access. And then there were further requests from scrutiny, which ultimately led to planning permission not being obtained until early June of this year, which, of course, essentially pushed it all into to the new government. In relation to the design and a delivery partner, again, a number of members, I think Deputy Gorst specifically talked about this and said it was impossible to deliver for the 804.5 million with the current design and delivery partner. And we were acutely aware of that. When we left office, and I think Councillor Trinity should remember this, there was about somewhere between a 30 and 40 million pound difference. The design and delivery partner was coming in at about 840 million at that time. And we had said to officials, no, we were pushing hard. We were negotiating as hard as we could to get the price within the amount approved by the states. With the current delivery partner, I think that's right. That would have proved impossible. But there were other options. There are other delivery partners that wanted to talk to us. And right now, I agree. The hospital couldn't be delivered now for the 804.5 million because time moved on. We are suffering from, or we are seeing impacts from, seismic geopolitical circumstances around the world, not least Brexit and COVID, but of course, European strife and other issues. And one thing for sure is that every day that goes on, the price will only go one way, and that is up. And that is one of the reasons why I am asking for a tight deadline, a realistic deadline, but a tight deadline, because I think every day is important. Every day we wait and procrastinate and delay, the price is going up for whatever we do. So that is the rationale for that, sir, and that is the reason why we didn't seek to borrow at that time. Now, Deputy Balazs, so actually, when he started speaking, actually said, "Oh, this is going to be quite a good speech," and actually, it was. I was pleased that he recognised, and I hope Chief Minister and the Council of Ministers recognise that this is not. Whatever the outcome of this request for more information, it's not, and nor should it be a signal as to whether this Assembly is giving the green light to the government to go on and cancel the Overdale project and produce and go with solely their own option. The multi-site solution, Deputy Balazs, a former bailiff and presiding officer on many occasions, would know that the Assembly has to agree that on a different occasion, and that's a debate I think we're going to have. But there are two things that prompted me to lodge this proposition, and those were comments by by ministers, sir, and I think possibly the Chief Minister, but I could stand corrected, that and actually Deputy Osif raised it in the question, he questioned the process about the previous approval by the states if they couldn't be met. And of course the Amendment 20 to the government plan asks the Assembly to spend, I think, 40 or 50 million pounds more now on acquiring Kensington Place for 16 million and spending, I don't know, another 28 to 30 million pounds on consultancy work to work up new designs. And it is suggested that should the states agree to that amendment, then we are giving the green light to proceed with the multi-site scheme, sir, without, of course, having come back and cleared up, as Deputy Ballard rightly pointed out, or got states' approval to cancel the Overdale scheme. I was extremely disappointed, sir, to be accused of political mischief, because whilst I do like a bit of political mischief now and again, this is a very important issue. We are talking about building a hospital, sir, providing the best health facilities for Ireland. We are talking about the lives of islanders. So Deputy Luce, I think probably surprised me the most when he said, basically, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. How can he possibly say or think that our current health infrastructure, our hospital, isn't broken? It's broke, sir, and I'll come to that a little bit later. Summing up, sir, finally, our hospital is an investment, an essential investment into the lives and health of all islanders. Members will know full well that our existing hospital is deteriorating rapidly, and the longer we delay in delivering a new hospital, the more this will impact upon our running costs, the standards of care, urgent recruitment of medical professionals, and the retention of our existing and valued professional and clinical colleagues. And I would like to remind a member, sir, on the back of Deputy Luce's comment that our existing hospital has cramped wards, corridors doubling up as bed and linen stores, buckets catching rainwater, creaking drainage and sewage systems, different departments bolted onto the ends of buildings, and an overall confusing and at times undignified patient experience. We have a maternity unit, sir, and I know work is being done on parts of that, sir, described as having the level of facilities found in some developing countries completely lacking peaceful and private surroundings for mothers and their new babies to bond, sir. And that's something I experienced, birth of my grandson, very recently, and whilst the staff were brilliant, sir, the surroundings were certainly difficult. There is also a distinct lack of any meaningful or usable outside space to help patients recover or visitors reflect. Of course, this does not take away from the remarkable job our health colleagues undertake 365 days a year, who can only continue to patch up and mend this hospital until 2026 before the costs of doing so accelerate at an exponential rate. We can't wait until 2032 for a remedy. We need to get on with it. Unlike the UK, sir, Northern Ireland, and other larger countries, we cannot travel to different specialist hospitals in neighbouring towns and cities. This means our hospital needs to be many things in one place. The Our Hospital project, Overdale, sir, presented an approved vision of a modern, fit-for-purpose, single-site hospital which meets the current and future needs of patients, clinicians and healthcare staff and visitors. It's a hospital where clinical adjacencies have been thoroughly thought through based on the experience and expertise of our doctors and our nurses and staff who will work in the new hospital. It will bring together for the first time a general hospital, an acute hospital, an ambulatory or day patient hospital, separate facilities for women and children's and maternity care, mental health facilities on site, for adults and children, and a knowledge and a training centre, There's no mention of knowledge or training centres in the multi-site option, and so many members have mentioned that's really key to retaining staff, The Overdale site was planned to provide a modern energy centre to provide power in the most environmentally sustainable way. So again, not mentioned in the multi-site solution. So let's just talk very briefly about that multi-site solution, because a number of members have also mentioned they're not sure about how many sites it will include. Well, I can say so. We have Gloucester Street, and we have Kensington Place, and we have Kennervey. So that's 3 sites. So we have Overdale. We're up to 4 sites, where Deputy Binet has talked about the jury still being out on what happens with mental health facilities. So that could be a 5th site. What about an educational and learning centre? So where are we going to put that? How are we going to power our new hospitals, our new health facilities, as they're now being called, with a commitment to our carbon neutrality programme? So the hospital at Overdale had modern energy centre to provide power in the most environmentally sustainable way, included in the programme, Where are we going to put maintenance and catering? So I'm up to about 8 sites. At Overdale, there will be more operating theatres, despite what some members have said, a far greater patient capacity. More single ensuite rooms available to all patients. 75% of the inpatient beds will be located in single ensuite rooms. Proper staff wellbeing areas, all set in carefully landscaped gardens and open spaces to provide an elevated and peaceful, light-filled and healing environment with far-reaching sea views across the island, across our wonderful view across the base and the island, for recovery and work and reflection, This will help us attract the very best healthcare professionals well into the future. This isn't about 6-star, world-class, gold-plated, all the other ways this hospital is being described. I've never actually said it's going to be a world-class hospital, although islanders do deserve a world-class hospital. In the recent conference, a member of the public stood up and said, we don't need a world-class hospital. A surgeon stood up shortly after and said, I've come to work in Jersey from London, and I want to help create a world-class health service for the island. But this Overdale project by no means is gold-plated, And if you wanted, if we wanted to do that, we could spend billions of pounds. One only has to travel to Scandinavia and certain countries around the world to find examples of hospitals that are well beyond our reach. But this is a good hospital we could build, And so before we abandon all of this potential, and I'm comforted by Deputy Balash's words, and I hope the other ministers, and it is the Chief Minister's understanding, that to abandon Overdale have to be a debate that have to come back to this Assembly to do that. But before we abandon all of this, surely we have a duty, This Assembly has a heavy responsibility to ensure that we know and understand all of the comparisons with what is being proposed. To summarise, then, I would like to reiterate that what I'm asking for today is for the government to report back by the 20th of March, which I think they can do, sir, bearing in mind this is not a forensic line-by-line, like-for-like comparison we're asking for. We're asking for a good, albeit high-level overview, but a good overview with the information that is at hand and the time that the cost consultants and the Treasury team and all the staff have between now and the 20th of March to come back to give this Assembly a meaningful comparison, because it's going to need that comparison before we can debate and agree on whether we take Overdale off the table. I can't believe this Assembly would do that without wanting to know what the new hospital is going to cost. And I am certain the new multi-site hospital, which will be a compromise on what we could have and what we have now and what we've always done. We've always bolted things on and we've made do with things in Jersey. And we have a real opportunity to do something better than that for islanders. So, sir, I'm asking for a direct like-for-like financial analysis of the multi-site option and the approved Overdale project. And that includes not only providing more information on the multi-site scheme, sir, but also drilling down a bit deeper. Now we're approaching the next stages of Overdale into some information that the previous Overdale scheme doesn't have. It means find a bit more information out about that as well, sir. More importantly than money, sir, is understanding the clinical implications. And I'm asking for a direct like-for-like clinical and medical analysis of the multi-site option and the approved Overdale project, sir. And I'm asking for the Treasury Minister to come back with some different funding options which take into account, sir, the challenges we are facing, short-term economic challenges we are facing, sir, and perhaps taking into account that our reserves may well be doing better in periods of high interest and we might be earning more money on our reserves, sir. I understand that high interest rates will also lead to perhaps several £100 million more worth of tax revenues in the years ahead. So that all needs to be taken into account and balanced against this decision, sir. And as I said, when I presented the proposition, requests for extra information about public projects, especially those of such major importance to our community, are an established part of our democracy. They are an expected part of the process for which I've been criticised quite heavily by some members for having the cheek to bring this proposition to ask for more information, sir. And all ministers and members and civil servants know, sir, that is part of our process. Questions and clarifications in the public interest are or should always be factored in to government decision making. And the government, sir, must be properly held to account by this Assembly, especially, sir, in matters of such great public importance, and especially in matters, sir, that require great investment by public funds, sir. And I urge members, sir, with all my heart, sir, and goodwill to support this essential request for more information, and I commend the proposition to the Assembly. Thank you.
Ask the appel.
Point of clarification, please, sir.
Are you prepared to give way for a point of clarification?
No, sir, I'll go straight to the...
Very well. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on P109 as amended. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated, 15 votes pour, 32 votes contre. 15 is called for.
Those voting for the Connotabs of St Heliers, St Lawrence, Trinity, St Martin, Deputies Southern, Tadier, Rob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mesick, Coles, Porray, Catherine Curtis, Feltham and Kovac.
Very well. The next item of public business is the proposed government plan 2023 to 26, P97, lodged by the Council of Ministers. The main respondents will be the Chair of the Scrutiny Liaison Committee. I think the first thing to do is to establish which of the amendments has been accepted. So, Minister, are you accepting any of the amendments?
Yes, sir. We're accepting the first amendment, Amendment 9, Amendment 10, Amendment 15, Amendment 17, and Amendment 25.
And Amendment 15 will be accepted as amended, presumably.
That's correct, sir. The Deputy Wards accepted our amendment of his amendment.
Members agree that we can take the proposition as amended by those amendments? Very well. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they're of opinion to receive the Government Plan 2023 to 2026 specified in Article 9.1 of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2019, the law, and specifically, A, to approve the estimate of total states income to be paid into the Consolidated Fund in 2023, as set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 1 to the report, which is inclusive of the proposed taxation and AMPO duties changes outlined in the Government Plan, in line with Article 9.2a of the law, except that the estimate of income in 2023 for AMPO duty on tobacco shall be amended to 19,483,000 to reflect an increase in tobacco duty on hand-rolling tobacco of 16.8%, on cigars of 18.4%, and other tobacco products of 15.4%. And in Summary Table 1, total states income from stamp duty and land transfer tax should be amended in accordance with the following table, with sum total rows updated accordingly. For stamp duty, the 2023 estimate should be 51,000. In 2024, 51,376. In 2025, 53,442. In 2026, 56,187. Land transfer tax in 2023, 6,887. In 2024, 7,155. 25, 7,397. And in 26, 7,718. 2, the total income arising from future tax measures should be reduced in each of the years 2024 to 2026 by 3,063,000, with sum total rows updated accordingly, and references to land transfer tax, LTT, should be amended to land transaction tax, LTT. B, to approve the proposed changes to approval for financing borrowing for 2023, as shown in Appendix 2, Summary Table 2 to the report, which may be obtained by the Minister for Treasury and Resources, as and when required, in line with Article 9.2c of the law, of up to those revised approvals. C, to approve the transfers from one state's fund to another for 2023 of up to and including the amount set in Appendix 2, Summary Table 3, in line with Article 9.2b of the law. D, to approve each major project that is to be started or continued in 2023 and the total cost of each such project and any amendments to the proposed total cost of a major project under a previously approved government plan in line with Article 9.2d, E and F of the law and as set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 4 to the report. E, to approve the proposed amount to be appropriated from the Consolidated Fund for 2023 for each head of expenditure, being gross expenditure less estimated income, if any, in line with Articles 9.2g, 10.1 and 10.2 of the law, and set out in Appendix 2, Summary Tables 5.1 and 2 of the report, except that in Summary Table 5.1, the line for infrastructure, housing and environment should be deleted and replaced with two new lines as follows: infrastructure income, I think it should be million, I think I've been saying 22,000, 22,950,000, expenditure 68,201,000, head of expenditure 45,251,000, environment income 8,227,000, expenditure 18,481,000, and head of expenditure 10,254,000. In summary table 5.1, the line for Department for the Economy should be deleted and replaced with two new lines as follows: economic development, tourism, sport and culture, expenditure of 32,526,000, head of expenditure 32,526,000, financial services, expenditure of 7,738,000, and head of expenditure of 7,738,000. In summary table 5.1, to allocate funds to enable the extension of the provision of travel for individuals accompanying patients travelling out of the island to receive treatment arranged by the Health and Community Services Department, such funding to be informed by a review of the process by which travel is provided and purchased for travel in order to ensure that the provision is patient-centred and the best value for money is being achieved. 1. The head of expenditure for health and community services should be increased by 350,000. With funding to be allocated from the COVID-19 response head of expenditure in summary table 5.1 and made available for use by the Minister for Infrastructure, should it be required in excess of existing funding, to extend the Avanti 18 bus scheme to 1, all full-time students who are 19 years and older, to include students in full-time education undertaking higher education at Highlands College, colleges and universities in the UK or abroad, and 2, all trainees and apprentices who access education through Highlands College and or who receive funding from the Skills Jersey Tracker scheme. F, to approve the estimated income being estimated gross income less expenditure that each state's trading operation will pay into its trading fund in 2023 in line with Article 9.2h of the law and set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 6 to the report. G, to approve the proposed amount to be appropriated from each state's trading operations trading fund for 2023 for each head of expenditure in line with Article 9.2.1 of the law and set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 7 to the report. H, to approve the estimated income and expenditure proposals for the Climate Emergency Fund for 2023 as set out in Appendix 2, Summary Table 8 to the report. And I, to approve in accordance with Article 9.1 of the law the Government Plan 2023-26 is set out at Appendix 3 to the report, except that 1, after the words "and enveloped property transactions tax," EPTT, on page 33, there shall be inserted the words "to support the island's housing needs, ministers are also proposing an exemption to the higher rate for property developers who purchase and develop residential property for resale in the course of their trade." 2, on page 46, an additional bullet point should be added to the list under the heading Objectives of the Value for Money Programme with the following text inserted. The Council of Ministers will continually seek to identify opportunities for joint working with Guernsey which could generate improved value for money through collaboration, whether through revenue savings or more effective services.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Following the Assembly's approval of our Common Strategic Policy at the last sitting, I'm delighted to be proposing the Government Plan, the next important part of our 4-year programme for government. In adopting the Common Strategic Policy, we have now set our principles and our priorities for this term of government, and we have already shown our determination to deliver on the changes that islanders want to see. We're making good progress, sir. I believe we're on the right path, but there is more to do and more to deliver. And given the extent of the challenges that we face, there is no time to waste. The Government Plan builds further on our work so far to putting Jersey back on track and to taking the action that is needed to protect our future. The Government Plan supports the ambitions of islanders, investing in public services, reducing our debt and keeping taxes down. Importantly, the plan delivers balanced budgets, ensures we're spending within our means, and maintaining sustainable public finances for the long term. Our plan reflects a government and an assembly that is on the side of hard-working islanders, helping individuals and their families through these turbulent and difficult global economic times. So, for reasons outside of our control, the government plan has been delivered under a reduced and a tight timetable, a 10-week lodging period as opposed to the usual 12, regrettably giving less time for scrutiny and for the preparation of amendments. Unusually, it has also, for this 4-year, largely run in parallel with the strategic plan process, putting more pressures on all of us in this Assembly and on our officials, both in government and in the state's GREF. I therefore wish to acknowledge the work undertaken by scrutiny panels and their officers, by ministers and our officials, by the GREF team, and of course by members themselves, for all playing their respective roles in preparing for this debate. As always, the quality of the government plan is enhanced by the scrutiny and the legislative process. As a government, we have approached amendments openly with the default position of trying to accommodate them where we can, including by proposing further amendments to amendments in order to reach consensus. There are, of course, some amendments which the Council of Ministers don't feel able to accept or to amend. We look forward to those debates and the amendments to explaining our position and our reasons, and of course for committing to implementing the final decisions of the Assembly. This is a government plan which invests in the future of our island community. It builds on the mini-budget passed in September, which reduced the tax burden on the majority of islanders, those paying tax at the marginal rate, giving targeted support for those islanders who need help with the rising cost of living. That mini-budget set the fiscal tone for this government, which is continued in this plan and will guide us through to 2026. The tone we've set is to ensure that islanders keep more of their own money, that we give targeted support in challenging times, and that we invest in our key public services to make the improvements that they are both desperately needed and that islanders have made clear that they want to see. So this plan commits £141 million of capital investment in 2023 and a £363 million capital programme over the 4 years of the plan. That will deliver improvements to our public realm, notably a refurbished and updated opera house, which currently stands as a monument of shame in Gloucester Street for a lack of vision and investment. And a new therapeutic children's home will also be delivered. So this government plan brings total spending on delivering services to islanders to £996 million next year. We will be spending £248 million on our health services. That's an additional £22 million on last year. We'll be investing nearly £180 million in our education and children's services, again an increase of £22 million. Social security spending will be £131 million, giving support to islanders who need it through social benefits and long-term care, helping some of the most vulnerable members of our community and those who fall on hard times. This, of course, incorporates and builds on the measures taken in the mini-budget, where we've already doubled the community costs bonus, doubled winter fuel payments, and uprated income support payments. In total, the government plan will invest £61 million of additional money in key public services during the next year, not only in health and education, but we're spending more on the fire and rescue services and the state's police. And of course, their fine services are very much at the forefront of our minds this week as we watch them conduct not one but two major incidents and respond to them. We will ensure that our frontline emergency services can continue to provide the first-class services we've become used to. We know that many of our public services need to improve dramatically, sir, and urgently. That turnaround is now in motion, particularly in health, and will be supported by the necessary resources. This is coupled with a determination to deliver on the underlying housing and skills challenges that we face as a community and an economy, and which we have also prioritised for improvement elsewhere in the government programme. That is why the plan includes, again, the £10 million set aside for assisted home purchase schemes. The difference in this plan is that we intend to use that money actively to support first-time buyers over the term of this government. So the spending set out in this government plan clearly needs to be supported by the appropriate revenue-raising proposals. We've achieved this whilst reducing the burden for many taxpayers. The government plan reiterates the personal income tax threshold increases against agreed in the mini-budget, representing tax cuts for around 90% of taxpayers. We're freezing duty on road fuel in order to help with the increases we're all seeing in the cost of living, and freezing alcohol duty to give support to the hospitality sector. Tobacco duties will increase above inflation in accordance with Deputy Andrews' amendment. Vehicle emissions duties will increase most for the high-polluting vehicles. And a new higher rate of stamp duty will come into effect for those purchasing residential property other than that for use as their own main residence, with variance possible in this respect depending on how the Assembly votes on the amendments before it. As members are aware, we're also currently reviewing our high-value resident criteria. Work will be completed by the end of this year to ensure that in future we're more discerning and have a scheme which delivers more income from a smaller number of residents. In the meantime, the government plan increases contributions where possible within the existing rules of the current high-value residency scheme. It maintains the principles of our tax policy that have kept us successful, being low, broad, simple and fair. Sir, this is a plan which puts the needs of islanders first and supports hard-working individuals and their families, reducing the burden on them while seeking more from those who have more to give. The last government increased both actual and forecast public debt by more than other governments in our island history, going from 250 million to a proposed 1.7 billion in one term of office. Some of this borrowing was necessary, others was not. This government plan starts to bring our debt down, firstly by repaying the COVID borrowing in full by the end of this year. Many countries throughout the world will be repaying the debts incurred during the pandemic for a whole generation, and I'm pleased that Jersey is paying theirs off already. The debt of £756 million, which was planned for financing the new hospital, is reduced to £90 million by this plan. Some borrowing in addition to this will, of course, be required for our new healthcare facilities, but I'm confident that the extent of the burden on islanders can be reduced well below the existing figure. Borrowing can be a tool for delivering improvements to the public realm and public infrastructure projects, but we mustn't forget the root of our success as a stable, well-run and financially prudent jurisdiction. This is a hard-earned reputation which won't be assisted by runaway levels of debt. It's important, sir, that some control was exercised, and under this government and this Treasury Minister, prudence and value for money are back in play. This takes me, sir, to the ongoing values of our state's funds. The Strategic Reserve currently holds over £1 billion and is forecast to have a value of just over £1.1 billion by the end of this plan. The Social Security Reserve Fund currently holds £1.9 billion, which is forecast to increase to £2.3 billion by the end of the plan. In total, the value of states' funds stand at £3.2 billion in 2023, and we forecast that to increase to 3.8 billion by 2026. Whilst we must all recognise that these are forecasts in uncertain times, islanders can nevertheless be reassured by these healthy figures and the ongoing sound management of our investment assets over the long term, which set Jersey aside as a jurisdiction of stability. So our policy of cutting taxes for the majority of islanders, investing in public services and starting to deliver on health, education and housing will only be possible on an ongoing basis if we deliver value for money for islanders. That's why all ministers are committed to delivering value for money in our public services, striving for continuous improvement, delivering tangible efficiencies and improving productivity. It's a programme that aims to deliver £40 million of efficiencies by 2026. That's 40 million in a budget that will soon reach over £1 billion. This is money which we can reinvest where it is needed most. So this government plan will provide the foundation to deal with our challenges and ensure our ongoing prosperity. It's a plan which gives us stability, flexibility and durability. By maintaining a strong economy and sound finances, we can move forward with a policy focus on housing, skills, the cost of living and improving our public services. The focus must now be on delivery for islanders, and I look forward to our debates and I move the proposition.
Thank you very much, Chief Minister. Is the proposition seconded? Very well. There are a number of amendments still for debate. The first listed in the running order is the 26th Amendment, Renter Room Tax Relief, lodged by the Council of Ministers itself, so the main respondent will be the Treasury Minister. And I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
Page 2, paragraph A. After the words Article 9(2)A of the law, insert the words, except that total state's income in 2023 shall be reduced by 330,000 following the introduction of a new renter room income tax relief to commence in the year of assessment 2023. Page 2, paragraph E. After the words of the report, insert the words, except that in summary table 5.2, the head of expenditure for the community fund should be reduced by 330,000. Page 2, paragraph I. After the words as set out at Appendix 3 to the report, insert the words, except that underneath table 10 on... Except that underneath table 10 on page 34, they shall be inserted the heading renter room tax relief below which there shall be inserted the words, ministers are proposing a renter room income tax relief under which lodging income of £10,000 a year or less will be exempt from income tax. If lodging income exceeds 10,000, the full amount would be taxable in the normal way, but would benefit from the existing concessional treatment. This proposal is intended to encourage better use of existing housing stock and allow islanders to generate additional income while providing accommodation at a fair rent to ease the housing strain. The required legislative changes will be made by an amendment to the Draft Finance 2023 Budget, Jersey Law 2000, and would come into force for the year of assessment 2023 and future years.
Chief Minister.
So, can I just ask before we start, is there a need to declare if somebody, as a member, rents a room because they could be financially beneficial to them? I don't, but there you go. Thank you.
I'm not sure there's a direct pecuniary advantage for anyone in passing the proposition. It's a proposed way forward, and I'm not sure it's necessary to make a declaration. There would be an exemption from income tax, I suppose, if individuals elected to rent out a room, but I'm not entirely sure that...
So it's just if it's passed, and it may be, may not, people could be voting for, if they are renting out a room, would be voting for directly for a tax exemption for themselves. I just wondered if there needs to be a declaration of interest, that's all. Thank you. So if there isn't, then that's fair enough. It was just a question that was asked me. Thank you.
My instinct is that there doesn't need to be a declaration at this point, but if members wish to indicate an interest, it is always open for members to do so. Yes, Chief Minister.
So it's my understanding that Deputy Rob Ward would be proposing an amendment to this.
Yes,
Would he not
presumably
speak on
you're
that
not
first?
taking, you're not, the way it would work, Chief Minister, is that the government amendment is proposed, it's seconded, and then Deputy Ward's amendment to the amendment is dealt with. So it's the government amendment that's taken first. So are you proposing that on the government's part, Chief Minister?
Yes, and the Treasury Minister will speak on this.
Right.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that. I should have been a little bit quicker pressing my button. I don't believe I need to speak for long on this amendment. It's quite straightforward. It says what it does on the tin. It gives relief to those who are renting out a room on the first £10,000 of that rental income. It really has been proposed by a fellow member of the Assembly, so I'm not sure whether I could have called it Barbara's rent-a-room, but that has too many connotations. But Deputy Barbara Ward made this proposal, and on investigation by my officials, it was found that it was reasonably straightforward to do, and it of course has the added benefit at a time of a housing crisis and a recruitment crisis that it creates a further opportunity for those who might have spare rooms to support the rest of the island in renting out those spare rooms. It seeks, of course, put a ceiling on so that the rental can be reasonable. And so we also hope that by this measure, it might mean that some of these islanders who are currently having to live on sofas, and I think the term is sofa surfing, that this might create an opportunity in a market for those to actually be in a bedroom and have more certainty and get back onto their feet in an appropriate manner. So we hope that it will do those things. The other potential positive out of this as well is we know so that some older members of our community have not felt able to downsize for all of the reasons that we know. I am one of those individuals that don't believe older members of our community should be forced to downsize, but no doubt we'll be having that debate in due course with the Housing Minister. But what this does is mean that they can actually, for all sorts of positive reasons, and that's not just the financial reasons, but rent their room and help in...
I beg your pardon. I'm
no,
sorry.
it's okay, sir. Help in regard to having other occupants or people in their rooms. We all know of the positive good that interaction between generations and a sense of rhythm and a engagement with other humans. We see only in the recently published survey that there are some in our community that are struggling with loneliness. So there are a number of really positive benefits that this simple tax change might make, and I commend it to the Assembly, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, is it seconded? Very well, there is an amendment lodged by Deputy Ward, and I ask the greffier to read the amendment to that amendment.
After the words future years, insert the words, the scheme will be covered by the Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Jersey Law 2018, which would apply to all rooms included in this scheme. The necessary legislative amendments will be put in place in 2023 to extend the law to include where one or more individuals rent rooms in the same dwelling in which the owner resides, where the period of residency exceeds 30 days and there is some form of reward. The duties outlined in the law and subordinate legislation apply to the owner. This includes requirements around electrical safety, gas safety, smoke detection and similar, and ensuring that the property is safe and free of the hazards outlined in the legislation, including damp and mould, excess cold, space, security, trip hazards, falls from height and similar. page 2, part 3, after the words future years, insert the words, an option will be included for participants in the scheme to check whether the prospective tenant or homeowner is subject to the notification requirements of the Sex Offenders Jersey Law 2010, which permits a register of offenders to be kept, and similarly for the new Domestic Abuse Jersey Law 2022, when this comes into force.
Well, the main responder will be the Minister for the Environment, Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I make the point that I would intend to take this vote in two parts, because this is a two-part amendment, and I believe from my inquiries to De Greffier that I can do that, and I thank them for those conversations, because I massively overcomplicated them, but thank you for their answers. So this amendment is not about whether the money being allocated is the best use of taxpayers' money or not. That is for the main debate. This is about adding standards and security to the proposed scheme. This amendment seeks to include this scheme in the coverage of the Rental Dwellings Law and to add a process of safeguarding to the rental of rooms in the private home. Safeguarding is an issue that is incredibly important in public service. It is also incredibly important in a home that somebody lives in, particularly if you are renting a room in someone else's home, because you are sharing a kitchen, a bathroom perhaps, and you have access to the main residence itself. So one of the issues with this is it seems to have had no scrutiny and no consultation as to how this scheme will work and where it will work. And to introduce and use taxpayers' money in this way concerns me. So, sir, I spoke to a number of people during my drop-in constituency drop-ins, which are really, really useful, and to groups that we have contact with all of the time. So I have an email that I'm going to draw from, but I'm not going to say where it's from, because some of the groups that deal with vulnerable groups don't want to be named in the political arena, but want to have their views expressed. So as a representative, we act as a vehicle for those. So I'll just want to read some of these. So this is, firstly, I worry that this is a genuine attempt. If this is a genuine attempt to ease the housing crisis, it is only papering over the cracks and cannot be seen as a long-term positive response. It feels like it is encouraging and increasing sofa surfing within the island, providing people the opportunity to make money from this. Separately, having been a lodger myself in houses belonging to others, there is rarely a sense of genuine belonging or security, because you are aware it is not your home and always having to live to someone else's standards, lifestyle, routines, etc. In my experience, it can be work as a short-term favour for a friend or family member, but it is much more complicated when strangers are involved. When there is a genuine balance of power in the housing, within the rights to all parties covered in the law and legal documents, it allows both landlord and the tenants to flourish. With lodging in a room, there is often an imbalance in power. There is usually little to protect the tenant from eviction, poor behaviour by landlords, or poor standard accommodation, and so it constitutes an insecure housing solution. I'll say that again, an insecure housing solution, which would be considered homelessness by many definitions. And I think that's a very important point. We are using a taxpayer fund to create a situation which is in no way secure, long-term, or a real solution to the housing crisis. And I'll come on to that a bit later. There is also little to protect the homeowner should the tenant become abusive or difficult, leaving them open to huge problems that may be made worse if the homeowner is in any way vulnerable. And the talk of older members of our community renting homes concerns me, without safeguarding and without protections in place. There needs to be more thinking around the safeguarding protection for both parties before this is actively encouraged by government. So another concern is that the quality accommodation that will be provided, and I noticed that in the JEP this week, the Jersey Landlords Association openly saying they almost bragging about their members are committed to achieving the minimum standards of accommodation. This was a comment made to me that I wrote down. We are already, and this is the other comment, we are already in a disgraceful situation where much of the rental housing stock is substandard and wouldn't meet the basic levels of quality and safety. An unregulated scheme like this will likely provide lower standards of accommodation than is already available. That is not okay, especially given the news around mould and the deaths in rental accommodation coming from the UK. So one of the real concerns I have here is unless we include a standard of accommodation, those who are desperate, those who are, as one was saying, is sofa surfing, will take accommodation because it is all that's left to them. And then they will not be considered at risk from homelessness anymore. And that support and that help that may have been there will be gone. Now, we would have got rid of some of the figures, but we would have got rid of them with inadequate accommodation. So I note that from a question from Deputy Kovac some time ago, there are 607 rooms that are being rented on the island already, which and I will stand to be corrected, but I'm sure I'm right, could be included in this scheme. Now, if half of them are included in this scheme as 1 or 2 rooms, and take the full £2,000 tax break, that's already double the amount of money that is put into the cost of this. But we'll come back to that in the main debate, I think, when we look at money. So another concern that was raised, and this is the wording of it, that a tax break that benefits homeowners with spare rooms by any measure that would disproportionately benefit the wealthiest in our island who already enjoy really favourable taxation. I'm not sure that sits about given the cost of living crisis and many people struggling with. And the final thing that was said to me and sent to me, I believe that this needs much more careful thought and scrutiny, certainly needs scrutiny, and with the voice of potential homeowners and lodgers heard to understand the issue before this scheme is rolled out. So that's why I've come forward to say we need to amend this scheme to put in safeguards. You would not go into a restaurant and just because it only has 2 or 3 tables say, oh, don't worry about the hygiene standards, it's only got 2 or 3 tables, we don't have to worry about them. Subsequently, you would not say, just because it's 1 room that's being rented or 2, that the standards of accommodation are not important. They are. Now, one of the arguments that will be used, I'm sure, is that when people rent out their own homes, they tend to be of better standard. Well, let's hope so. But government policy cannot be built upon, we hope that's the case and here's some money to encourage it. It simply does not work. You are dealing with people's lives. One of the things that I would say, sir, I read this sorry, sir, I lost my track. One of the issues around not including this in any standardisation is that we do not know, and it is not clear from this scheme, is who is being targeted. We talk about government action being targeted, but who would this be targeted to? Would it be those just leaving home at the age of 18, 19, 20, in their mid-20s? Would it be older members of our community who simply don't have the money to pay for rental accommodation if they lose their accommodation? Will it be those with single parents who might be really struggling to find somewhere to live and so therefore live in 1 room in somebody else's home? And if that is the case, then having a child in the house entirely changes the need for safeguarding. You would not put a child into school without safeguarding things in place. Every single member of any school community that has access to children will have a DBS check, and quite rightly they should, because they need to be safe around our children. And this is not about scaremongering, this is about preparing for the worst so that it never happens. And unless government policy does that, government policy and governance is failing our people. And so this is one of the issues that we need to address in this situation. Now, I want to talk about, for example, perhaps another issue that might come up is that this happens with language students who come over in the summer, for example, and this will be an opportunity for those. I believe that if you take a language student into your house, you also need to have a DBS check so that there is a safeguard on board so that those young people coming into your home are considered to be safe. With this scheme as it stands, with no detail, there is nothing to ensure that that happens. There is nothing to ensure that either the tenant or the landlord is not on the sex offenders register, for example. Now, I'm not judging in that way, and I know that is a complex issue. However, and I mentioned in my report, and there are consequences to this. If you go through these laws, and my stint on Home Affairs, I've become very familiar with the details of these laws. And I mentioned in my report that one of the things that can happen on the sex offenders register is that a warrant can be issued to search that person's home. If you are renting in that home or you're the landlord of somebody who is on that register, you become subject to that search and you may not even know about it. Now, for transparency, if you're renting your home, we cannot put people in that situation and then support it financially by government. So I want members to really consider, I'm not going to go on for too long, I did say to Deputy Gorse, if he doesn't, neither will I. One of the things I really want members to consider is the safety around this scheme. Is it right that the 1 or 2 rooms being let is not included in the standards of rental dwellings that we have? Is it right that there is no actual safeguarding in place for 1 or 2 rooms being rented in a home? Because at the moment we cannot see it in this scheme. And that is the issue that I have with this. The debate as to whether it's the right use of taxpayers' money, we'll do that on the main debate. Let's have that discussion later on. And so I'll say this, the final, and I put this in the report at the end, the final mechanism for applying the safeguards from this amendment is the responsibility of government as they finalise the rental room scheme. This is a necessary approach and gives an opportunity to ensure public money is not being spent with unwanted consequences. So I leave it at that at the moment, sir, and I will listen to members' comments as we go through the debate on this amendment. I'm slightly disappointed it wasn't accepted by government because this is a constructive amendment to say this protects standards and protects people as they move into a rental room scheme. I hope members can consider it really carefully, really sensibly, and across this assembly because of the scheme itself and what it might mean for the future of our people trying to find accommodation on this island. With that, so I move the amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
So may I declare an interest, which I should have done earlier? I have lodgers in my own property, which may be caught by the amendment, the principal amendment. It's on my declarations of interest, but also I think the amendment to the amendment is also such that it would be that all properties would be caught. So just for the out of an abundance of caution, I'm declaring an interest and would ask if others may well be in the same situation that could be affected. I apologise for not making it before.
Well, it's only if they're within the scheme, of course, because the amendment only applies to properties within the scheme, in the proposed scheme. And there is no scheme at the present time, but I mean, which is why I made the direction I gave. But it's perfectly proper for you to make that declaration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Very well. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Yes, Deputy Reynolds.
Sir, thank you. I'm sorry to have to speak against this amendment because I can see where Deputy Ward is coming from. But in my view, the approach here adopted is too simplistic and insensitive to the complexities of the situation. For me, the situation we have with rental rooms is all about proportionality. The clear intent of the scheme we are proposing is to quickly bring into play more rooms for rent at a time of significant housing shortage. We're trying to encourage rent-a-room. By giving a modest tax break, we hope to offer an incentive to those people who have unused rooms in their homes to consider taking on a tenant. The tax relief scheme is intended to provide extra accommodation, relieving the shortage of accommodation for seasonal workers. It's intended to enable homeowners to retain extra income at a time when some households are struggling. And it's intended to ease overall accommodation issues by encouraging better use of existing housing stock, for example, in homes where children have grown up and moved away. And we know from the census that we have a significant number of underutilised bedrooms in properties. It's targeted at foreign students and seasonal workers and others in those kind of categories where we know we do have some demand. So I want to look at the actual wording of the amendment because it is important to understand what is being requested
of the Assembly here. Remember, the amendment seeks to bring properties that benefit from this tax relief within the scope of the Public Health and Safety Rented Dwelling Law of 2018. One of the problems is the effect of this amendment would be to achieve the exact opposite of what is intended by the tax relief scheme. It would discourage people from bringing forward a room for rent and might also persuade people who are currently renting rooms to stop doing so. So let me examine why I think that's the case. Currently, the renting of a room in your own home is not covered by the 2018 law unless it involves 3 or more rooms, and that is for good reasons. It would impose onerous conditions in terms of regulatory requirements on a sector of the market where it has already been determined that they are not appropriate, and it's a sector of the market that has been functioning for a long period of time. It would also bring private homes within the scope of inspection by environmental health officers. So, renting a room inside your own living accommodation is not the same as renting out whole units of accommodation. Regulation should respect this difference and be proportionate to the risks. It is much less likely that accommodation within a house will be substantially lower in quality than it is for the homeowners themselves. So we are attempting to strike a balance. But there are other, bigger, more fundamental problems with this amendment. There are anomalies caused by the wording. It says the scheme will be covered by the Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Jersey Law 2018, which would apply to all rooms included in the scheme. The implications of this wording are significant. The amendment will only bring into the scope of the 2018 law those rooms that are covered by the government's proposed tax incentive. In other words, those that qualify for the exemption from tax of income up to £10,000. However, it would not apply to any other rental arrangement involving the renting of a room within a person's main residence. For example, if the rental income is greater than £10,000, in other words, above the tax break threshold, or if the person letting out is not a taxpayer at all. And that's made pretty clear, actually, in the report, which says this amendment seeks to extend the coverage of the law to all rooms within the proposed scheme. That is the tax relief scheme. So, sir, this amendment would create the highly anomalous situation whereby the qualification for tax relief would determine whether or not the room being let fell within the scope of the 2018 law. Rooms could move in and out of the scope of that law as the owner's tax status changed. That is what the amendment says. So it's also worth mentioning that this amendment requires changes to the primary law. Primary law amendments cannot be done at speed, as we know. They require States Assembly approval and royal assent from the Privy Council. The practical effect of this amendment would in all likelihood be to delay the tax relief for a year. But I'd add something else. In the new year, I hope to bring forward regulations under the 2018 law that will create a scheme for the licensing of private rented dwellings. I do aim to tackle standards in rented dwellings. It is something that I know the Deputy has long supported. I'm doing that because I believe that there is a well-evidenced problem and a proportionate way of dealing with it. This amendment fails both those tests. In my view, it is regulatory overreach. The Deputy said that if we go to a restaurant and it is 1 table or 2 tables, we would expect the same standards as a restaurant with lots of tables. Yes, we would. But I think the metaphor is incorrect. The comparison I would draw is between going to a restaurant and going to eat in someone's home. We would not expect the same standards of inspection if we go for dinner in somebody's house. So the Deputy has indicated his desire to take the amendment in 2 parts. So I'll move on to discuss the second part of the amendment, which is the reference to the Sexual Offenders Register. it says, an option will be included in the scheme for participants to check whether the prospective tenant or homeowner is subject to the notification requirements of the sex offenders law, and to also apply to the domestic abuse Jersey law when this comes into force. I think the problem this creates is similar to the one I identified with the main law, with the amendment, the part of the amendment that refers to the 2018 private rented dwellings law. I am told that the current disclosure arrangements in the sex offenders law are not sufficiently wide to allow for vetting a prospective tenant or landlord in this way. But even if that law worked for this purpose, this amendment would again create a highly anomalous and very complex situation. It would mean that two parties, landlord and tenant, would acquire rights to information about each other based on one party's tax position as it applies to rental income. To give an example, if the tenant asks to see whether the landlord is on the sex offenders register, they will need to first find out whether the landlord is in the sub £10,000 category of rental income. If the landlord is earning over this amount, then they would not have the right to inquire. If the landlord is not paying tax at all, then they would also not have to disclose this information. And what happens when their tax status changes? It is a recipe for chaos. So in conclusion, I understand why the Deputy has brought this amendment. It is reasonable to ask the question as to whether we should extend the 2018 law to include rent-a-room. But to me, the answer is we should not extend the law in this way. The implications of doing so would create numerous perverse outcomes, chief among them to significantly shrink the number of rooms available in this category. It would also create a shifting set of requirements for landlords depending on their tax status. It is not properly thought through. However, I am happy to commit to keep this segment of the rental market under review, and I will happily engage with Deputy Ward, his colleagues, or any other member of the Assembly if they become aware of problems with the way rent-a-room works after we introduce this tax relief, and act accordingly if the evidence supports that. But that should be done through a properly thought-through proposition to amend the primary law, not through an amendment to a budget measure which leads to all sorts of unintended consequences which I have outlined. Therefore, sir, I cannot support the amendment, and I urge members to vote against it. Thank you.
Very much. Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. I'm pleased to follow my St Brelard minister. So if there are unintended consequences that will arise out of this scheme, it is from the government's own proposition, not from Deputy Ward's amendment. But I'm not going to talk about the main proposition, sir, but I think we do need to allude to it, because I see this amendment as very much being a safety net. And what Deputy Ward is seeking to do here is that he's identified some very serious potential problems with what the government's trying to do. So at the moment, it's obviously a transaction, effectively, a free market transaction between a homeowner who lives in their home, presumably, and has a spare room, or more than one spare room who wants to rent that room out. Now, of course, we can look at whether incentives are necessary. That will be for the main proposition, sir. I would say that there's already an incentive to do that. It's called getting money for your room that is currently empty. And that is the incentive, and then you pay your tax on that money. But the government, for some reason, think that they have money to give away to people who already own their own properties. And the unintended consequences, if they do exist, are the creation of an even more precarious housing situation, and individuals who otherwise would have rights, and this should be of interest to Deputy Ferry, who I know will have come across so many housing issues in his time as Citizens Advice head, because housing issues were one of the big proportions of the work that Citizens Advice did and still do deal with. And they're one of the big elements that I, as a constituency deputy over the last 14 years, have dealt with, not just for St Brelard, but across the island. And I know that it's when you look at, get an email or a phone call or a message on social media from somebody, or you get tagged in a post which says, oh, this is terrible, we've been given 1 month's notice and we have to leave, the initial instinct is for one to go to the residential tenancy law, which I almost know inside out, and tell people, you know, they can't let you do that because they have to give you, your landlord has to give you 3 months' notice. And in some cases that reassures them, but often it's the case you realise that they fall through the cracks. They don't have an ordinary tenancy. They might be in the unqualified sector in a lodging house, or they might be indeed in this precarious living situation where they're just renting a room, which they might have been renting for years, but they can be given absolutely no notice whatsoever, and that's perfectly legal. And this government wants to encourage that precarious situation to continue. And what Deputy Warden, I think we're saying is that if that is genuinely the desired policy of this government and those in the Assembly who attempted to vote for this particular policy, then there at least need to be safeguards in there. And that's your responsibility as a government, not ours, to make sure that you get it right. It's the Assembly's job to make sure that if they're putting these propositions forward because somebody has approached them and said, wouldn't this be a good idea? Or I've got a line in my manifesto which says that this is a good idea on paper. What are the unintended consequences? That's what we're always asked. What about the unintended consequences? And we know that what the unintended consequences of an unamended proposition like this are. It creates more uncertainty, more precarity, and more potential poverty in the housing market. And this puts a safeguard in to say that, and this is the difference, Deputy Renouf, Minister, is that it's fine maybe to wash your hands of this and say we want proportionality when it's simply a transaction between homeowner and subtenant. They're not even real tenants. They don't have full status of a tenant, a lodger. It's fine if a lodger and a private individual want to come to an agreement and they go into that with their eyes open. But when the government of the day decides it wants to have some skin in the game and it wants to influence a particular policy by giving a particular section of our society a tax break, that's the difference. Government becomes complicit and it becomes liable, if not financially, certainly ethically. And that's the difference. In the same way that if government wants to have a drive to get more people cycling, they need to make sure that people can cycle safely. It's not simply a case of spending lots of money saying, go out, buy a bike and cycle, if all of the cycle paths don't exist, or if they're so dangerous that people can't do it safely. Government has an ethical responsibility to deliver its policies in an achievable, but also in a thought-out way. And the reason that the analogy of Deputy Renouf isn't correct about saying it's actually like going to somebody's house to eat is the difference is you don't charge somebody to come to your house to have a meal. And I hope that's not the case if ever I get invited to Deputy Renouf's house for a meal in the very nice area of Lamoy. I'm not sure, I won't hold my breath to get the invitation, sir. But I certainly wouldn't expect to take my wallet there for the privilege. And I certainly, if ever I reciprocated, I wouldn't expect him to pay for the privilege of coming to my house for a meal. But this is what the government's doing. If we follow that analogy, if that's the correct analogy, if, for example, there weren't enough restaurants in Jersey, you know, I don't envisage a situation where that ever would be the case. But if we had a dearth of restaurants, maybe a bit like in Cuba, where it's the case that people, I'm told, eat in each other's homes and they encourage people to provide restaurants in their own homes. And somebody says, you can come and get lobster from a couple of doors down from Deputy Renouf. There's a lovely little fisherman, I won't embarrass him, who catches lobsters, and I'm sure he could rustle you up, or certainly his wife could rustle you up a nice lobster thermidor, sir, if ever you wanted it. And that would be fine. And then the bill comes out and says, that would be £25, please, Deputy Tadier. And at that point, I would expect there would be some health and safety involved in it. I would expect that if there was effectively a renegade restaurant that opened up in Petitport, where this individual started making quite a lot of money, that it would actually be completely proportionate for the Economic Development Department and the Health and the Environment Minister to say, hang on a minute, what we've got here is not somebody just inviting, opening homes to their friends to eat. He's got a little racket that he's running here, and he needs to be covered, they need to be covered by basic health and safety law. And that's the analogy that we should be looking at. If government wants to get involved in giving people tax breaks, so first of all, they need to explain why they're doing that and whether it's proportionate. They at least need to be covered. And to simply say, oh, it's okay because it's only foreign students and seasonal workers, they're not real humans. They're not good enough to be covered by health and safety that we would expect to treat real humans with. Now, I don't think there's any actual demand out there. If you go to St. Willard's College, do they have any problem finding beds for their foreign students? I don't think they do. They've got advertising campaigns that they use, and it's seasonal workers. What this is about, however, it's about creating a solution, an interim stopgap solution for actually creating an even more two-tier society. And if we want to become like the likes of Qatar, which is very much in the news at the moment, which relies on paying low wages to an underclass in their society who don't have the same rights as other individuals, and the government is going to say this is a policy we want to pursue, at least do it properly. And this amendment is definitely a safety net and a seatbelt in what is possibly a bad policy to pursue anyway.
Thank you very much. Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So I made the declaration on a precautionary basis, but I don't believe that I would be covered by the plan, and in any event, I would say that I wouldn't do so. And I also should declare, sir, that prior to being elected, I was involved in setting up a recruitment agency. And that experience may well, not for profit, may well just be relevant to the comments just made by Deputy Tadier. So during the election, it was very clear that there were a number of issues coming across the doorsteps from our island community. A housing crisis, a recruitment crisis, and what we've had in the last debate, the health service issues. Having had a friend in hospital in the last few days, I'm aware of just how acute the problems are in relation to staff and some of the difficulties of the hard-working members of the health service in finding accommodation. Sir, to have brought seasonal workers, and I do find it quite unfortunate that Deputy Tadier seems to be casting some sort of implication that there's something pejorative about seasonal workers. All the seasonal workers that I know are absolutely people who are skilled people and all the rest of it. And to try and make this into a political debate, so I don't give way, sir. I don't give way, sir.
We don't have an exchange. If you have a point of order or a point of clarification, by all means stand and ask for that, and I'll make a ruling on it, Deputy. But we don't stand up and talk across our...
And that's why I asked for a point of order, sir.
I didn't hear you.
That's okay.
What point of order do you have?
So I think that the Deputy is misleading the Assembly and also imputing false motives on the basis that I never said. He knows full well I never said there was anything
that's
pejorative.
Not a point of order. I mean, you said what you said. That the Deputy Joseph says what he thought there to be implied into that, but I'm not sure that's imputing an improper motive on any part. And so therefore I don't rule that is something on which I should make a ruling under standing orders. But you have clearly made your point that you didn't say and didn't intend to say those things.
So can I seek further clarification? I get the ruling, sir. If a member says that a member has said something they didn't say, and clearly that there are different gradations of that, sir, where it could be more egregious than others. I'm not suggesting this is that example. At what point would the chair intervene and say, that's clearly something that the deputy didn't say?
Well, I have on occasion done so, as you might recall. There's been occasions when I've thought that a speech has been misstated by a member speaking, and I've said so. And in those circumstances, if it is clear in my mind that that's happened, then I might make an observation and ask the speaker to clarify if that's what they were saying.
So could I test you on that? And could I ask whether you thought I said that there was anything pejorative about... was there anything in what I said that was denigrating seasonal workers? that I don't think they have
I
value.
don't think, because the matter has passed, I don't propose to give any kind of ruling or decision on that. And hopefully members will always conduct themselves in a way which does not certainly intentionally mischaracterise, which would be wrong, but is careful about how it characterises what other people say or might have said, and I make that with no criticism. Deputy Millard, do you have a point that you wanted to make? Please carry on, Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful, and I apologise to Deputy Tadier. I was going on to say that he was he actually used the words "a right little racket" in relation to his observations of the scheme that was being put and his criticism of Deputy Reniff. Those were the words that he used, sir. But I'm sure that he didn't mean any casting any aspersion. I was just using the words that he repeated, sir. Sir, what the Environment Minister is asking and representing in this Assembly is that actually that we should not put in place a cumbersome and impossible to deliver a set of regulations in order to try and deal with what is the best intentions of trying to deal with the issues that I started referring to, which is a recruitment crisis and a housing crisis. The way that the recruitment issues now work, sir, as members will be aware, is that in getting a work permit, you actually have to have somewhere specific in order to allow that work permit to be processed by the Customs Immigration Department in order for that person to be brought to Jersey. It needs to be a specific unit of accommodation. And there is, as many members will be aware, there has been, which is the reason why I did what I did previously, there was simply an impossibility for bringing valued and much needed staff across all sectors and including seasonal workers to Jersey, which is why we've seen, sadly, so many restaurants and hotels and other organisations failing. There are some that are shut with restricted opening hours, etc. We're dealing with a crisis. So I call to mind the word that an enemy of a good plan is the dream of a perfect plan. And as the Minister has said, he will be keeping under review, as we know that there are standards of accommodation, which is going to be the subject of many members' concerns. He's undertaken to the Assembly to keep the standards of accommodation under review, and I certainly am very glad that he says that. What this scheme, if allowed without the amendment by Deputy Ward, which is impossible to deliver, as has been advanced by the Minister, is going to hopefully enable other people to consider opening up their rooms that they have in, and again, I regret to say, Deputy Tadier, in his observations, was making it almost a sort of negative if you're a homeowner. We know that there are issues, sir. Every member of this Assembly knows that there are issues in the housing market. Downsizers, as the Treasury Minister said, that wish to stay in their own home. There are people that need encouragement. And if we're using an opportunity of a budgetary measure to encourage the people to think about that, then we should do so. But it should be done so in the ability of not the perfect plan that would, in an ideal situation, mean that every single piece of accommodation would be able to be checked and verified, etc. But we are in a crisis, sir, and we can get on. And actually allowing more rooms to be available will give consumers of rooms more choice. And so where they are only able to find some scrappy accommodation at a very high price, which has been thoughtfully also thought of in this amendment by the Treasury and the Council of Ministers, because it's limited in terms of its cost. It's actually very carefully thought through. I'm hoping that a result of this amendment but the proposition going forward, and I congratulate Deputy Barbara Ward in coming forward with the idea. It was actually done by Chancellor George Osborne in the UK a number of years ago, and I understand it was very successful in doing so. And I'm, sir, looking forward to the fact that we're going to have an increase of supply of rooms available in quality homes, which is going to help our community in this cost of living crisis. It's going to give people some company and some confidence. And sir, I understand what Deputy Ward is trying to do, but he's trying to get perfection when we need to just get on with it. Action, not words, is what this government stands for. Action, not words. Let's get on with it. Let's listen carefully to the observations that the Deputy says. Quite right about quality accommodation, but let's get on with it. And let's try and send out the clear message that we're going to have more rooms available for these much needed workers of quality and giving people a hand up in relation to the cost of living crisis that we have. So I ask members to, with regret, vote against the Deputy's well-intentioned amendment that's just not possible to deal with it. I hope those observations are helpful.
Right, Deputy, before I call upon the next speaker, I should tell members will recall that we agreed to take an hour for luncheon during the course of this week's debate rather than the usual hour and a half, and therefore I propose to explore the adjournment at 1 o'clock as opposed to 12:45. So members can factor that into their thinking as to when they might speak. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to make one point. What I heard Deputy Tadei say was that this amendment was treating people as subhuman and at very least creating some kind of second-class citizen. I don't know where members of Reform went to university, but where I went to university, it is absolutely commonplace for students and people who have recently left university to take rooms in other people's homes. I have done so myself more than once. It's an entirely established practice. And can I just say again, sir, because I find it very distracting to listen to this debate, right through Deputy Renouf's comments to Deputy Ozif's comments, all I can hear is constant griping and grumbling from Reform. Everybody sits quietly and listens to them, and it would be really nice if they could show everybody else the same courtesy instead of mocking and scoffing and chatting amongst themselves, because I consider it's disrespectful and discourteous, sir. But I do not consider that this amendment in any way creates any form of second-class citizen. It simply provides accommodation for those who may need it on a short-term or slightly longer-term basis.
Thank you, Deputy. I mean, what I would observe is that obviously within the parameters of standing orders, anyone is able to participate in a debate and say whatever it is they believe to be relevant, as I say, subject to standing orders. When another member is speaking, the presiding officer has always accepted that there will be some measure of background discussion because quite often that's an important part of people understanding the position and discussing where it's going forward. However, what it mustn't do is to reach such a level that intrudes upon other members' ability to hear or the speaker's ability to communicate. And therefore, I'm sure members will understand that if that happens, I would expect anyone who's suffering a difficulty with actually hearing the speech or difficulty delivering it because they're distracted by a level of background noise to alert the chair, because it may be that my tolerance of these things, having been a judge for a long time now, is greater than those other members. So if I just make that observation, I'm certainly not making any observation about any particular group or any particular member who may be speaking or not, but it's just to indicate that's where I think we're able to deal with this in terms of debate. Very well. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. The original amendment by the ministers, I've sort of welcomed, because there is a serious labour crisis across all sectors of the economy, and anything that might be done to actually help there, I think many businesses will appreciate, particularly in hospitality. Whether this is going to have much effect, I remain a little bit sceptical, because I kind of think that if people are going to bring people into their homes, sometimes that's really out of need. And I'm sure if, certain measures are taken that actually continue to see our economy shrink, that need might be more widespread, and people may well want to bring in lodgers anyway. However, when it comes to Deputy Ward's amendment, I would just point out we are talking about lodgers. So basically people who share much of the living space with the person who's actually offering the room. So basically the question is that living space of sufficient quality? So you're basically saying to people, well, you either are offering a bit of a
well, you know, sorry, I shouldn't say whole. I'm sure there's a better word. I'm sure it could be more parliamentary, sir, but the word doesn't quite come to my mind. But if it's a hovel or something like that, well, that's that person's living, own home. And indeed, the person who has a choice in terms of where to lodge will see that, will be able to appraise that. So I'm not inclined to support the amendment. I'm sort of mildly inclined to support the general amendment of the Council of Ministers, but if that's the best you can do, well, heaven help us all. Thank you.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition or the amendment? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. The Minister for the Environment described this amendment as not properly thought through, which I have to say was extremely ironic, because the original amendment itself is back of a fag packet type stuff. It's something that has come about from a quick, perhaps well-meaning suggestion from a member without further consultation or consideration to it. It is about giving a tax break which will disproportionately be of the benefit felt by people who are already doing this. It's an amount of money that will go into the pockets of people who will do nothing, change no behaviour, and that, I'm afraid, is that. And for those who will perhaps feel an incentivisation to start renting rooms out as a result of it, will do so with no extra support, no extra advice, no extra marketing campaign to explain to them the rules that currently exist for how they ought to take part in this. It is badly thought out, it's not well targeted, and it's money which will disproportionately go to people for no change of behaviour whatsoever. It is a bad policy in my view, and what Deputy Ward has sought to do with his amendment is to try to put in some form of standards into it, to say that if you are going to rely on this form of housing, the form of housing in our society which is least regulated and least secure, that if that's part of the strategy, there ought to be some more consideration as to what we can do to improve those standards of housing and expose these people who will live there to less risk, to make sure that more of those homes will be safe to live in, and that those who will live in those homes will hopefully be taken care of by landlords who have greater expertise and understandings of what their obligations are. And part of the reason why that is so important is because, as is admitted by the government with this policy, the people who will largely live in these homes will be people who aren't from Jersey, people who in our society have the least agency when it comes to standing up for themselves, being able to have their rights applied, and in many instances understanding the language in which their rights are written in. And that's the intention behind this. It's to try to protect people, and that is considered by the Environment Minister to be not worth doing. I regret that. I think that is completely the wrong attitudes here. And his argument that raising standards will reduce supply, I mean, good grief, let's just abolish all standards then if we want absolute proliferation of supply then. It's this free marketeer attitude taken to such an extreme point in my view. It's just utterly unbelievable that people can think that way, in my view. So I sincerely hope that the Assembly will back Deputy Ward's amendment and require the government to do some thinking before it goes ahead with this, and offering to lose revenue through a tax cut to be disproportionately felt by people who will be doing nothing more than what they're currently doing, and to incentivise more rooms to be put out there for rent without any expectation that further standards be followed so that the people who live there will actually be safe. It just beggars belief that we're even debating this, frankly. It ought to have been incorporated into the original amendment anyway, but there we are.
Well, Constable Taylor.
Thank you, sir. Two questions come to mind. First of all is the status of people who put out a room on Airbnb. I'm curious to know whether this amendment will affect them and the tax that they pay, assuming they declare their Airbnb activities. But of more concern to me, having run a language school for 10 years, is the potential impact of this amendment on the host families of the island's language schools, because I know it's a difficult business to get families willing to host students. It's normally in the summer when they might want to get away. And I know that these families do pay tax they declare this income on their tax form, and presumably they would be caught by this provision that the government is suggesting. But whether they would still want to rent out their rooms to language schools if they had to meet the provisions of the amendment, I'm not sure, and that's why I raised the question. Thank you, sir.
Very much. So, Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Simply rise to remind members that exactly why this amendment has been brought and who it is aiming to assist. Yes, of course, as others have said, it's aiming to help provide some form of accommodation for those who are currently struggling to find it. Also, accommodation that does help to bring our community together by people living alongside local people. I do not see any shame in that, sir. I myself have been a lodger and lived alongside other people and found a great welcome that has benefited my experience at that particular time. There's also another group that this is designed to help, sir, and that is those people who are struggling with the cost of living, those working people who contribute to Island Life, who pay their taxes, yet are feeling the pinch, perhaps because their mortgage repayments have just risen by a large amount. And so this was a simple measure designed to help out and support people, two different groups of people, but consequentially at a difficult time in our history. It is not something that is unusual. Our amendment itself highlights and identifies other jurisdictions, namely the United Kingdom, the Republic of Ireland, and Guernsey, where there are similar measures in place because they are pragmatic and they are simple to achieve. If I could speak just on the particular point of young people attending summer schools, that is also identified in the government amendment because there are DBS checks in place for young people living as lodgers in another's home. And so, of course, that will remain in place because safeguarding is important, sir, but equally so is meeting the needs of our community and ensuring that everyone has access to housing. I won't rehearse the detail that the Minister for the Environment went into. I think he made that extremely clear in his eloquent speech, sir. But I do hope that members will understand the position that is in place here. We understand the intention of Deputy Rob Ward in bringing his amendment, but we urge the Assembly to vote against it, but to support the initial amendment, Amendment 26. Thank you.
Very much, Chief Minister. Deputy Sutton.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask the ministers what conversations have been had with representatives of temporary workers in, for example, hospitality, etc. What conversations have gone on over this particular change?
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. Reference was made earlier to one of my previous roles as Chief Executive of Citizens Advice. And of course, we did see lots of people who had issues with their housing, with their conditions. And I remember a time before residential tenancy law, and I'm sure other members will remember that time as well. But we find ourselves in a situation where we're behind where we need to be. our legislation is behind where we need to be. So this original proposition goes some way towards fixing that problem. Now, if you go back to residential tenancy law and remember that it was brought in on an incremental basis, it wasn't brought in all at once because it was recognised there was a need for change and that landlords and tenants needed to catch up, and the best way to do that was to bring the legislation in incrementally to allow all of those things to happen, and we find ourselves in a much better place now than we were 8 or 9 years ago. But Deputy Rob Ward's proposition would delay the process that we need to put in place right now to resolve so many of the issues that the island is facing. Because once we cure the housing problem in as any way that we can, all the other problems that we're currently experiencing will start to also be resolved. So I would say at the moment we can do that. We can fix this retrospectively. We can make further improvements, but it will take time. So let's put in place something now, something tangible, something real, and let's make sure that if there is further changes to be made, we can do that through the proper channels and with proper consultation. So I would urge members to reject the amendment to the amendment at this time. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. Sometimes I'm surprised at the turns that debates take. Suppose I shouldn't be, really. And I want to pick up on points that other speakers have made. I do think that the mover of the amendment is seeking a legitimate way to add safeguards to what is being proposed. But I must confess to being surprised by the comments of his party leader, who in his comments was largely against the underlying provision full stop and spoke very much against having a scheme or this scheme at all. And I think that just bears remembering by members when they come to this vote that the actual position is that my colleagues here appear to be, from their comments against the scheme, full stop, they don't support it. Ministers think that the actual scheme is worthwhile. Officials in Revenue Jersey have considered it. They've sought to limit it whilst at the same time creating the benefits that we have and other ministers have outlined. And the reason that the amendment doesn't work in practice is for all of those reasons that the Environment Minister has just articulated, and don't need to me to go over them again, so they're in breach of standing orders. In answer to the Constable of St Helier, he is right. There probably is an open question about whether everyone that makes income from Airbnb appropriately declares it. I know friends that do. If it's an entire house, of course, it's out with the scheme and so isn't covered. However, if it's a rent-a-room that Airbnb covers, then yes, it would be. Coming back together with what the Constable said about language schools and what Deputy Tadia said about language school in his new constituency. My understanding, of course, is that language schools have lobbied for some period of time, Revenue Jersey, about possible tax incentives to enhance and increase the number of rooms available. And I do think that the language schools add great value to our community and, of course, to communities across the globe. That link created as others come to our island community and learn English or French, I think does give lasting value, and therefore there is a call to do it. This is a scheme that my officials have been working on together with others that weren't able to get over the line in time for this budget, but we'll be bringing them forward in due course. They might not have had full 12 weeks conversations, but I know that I have, in meetings with representatives of Hospitality Association, spoken about this scheme and the others, and I think we can work on the assumption that if also being conversations with the tax professionals, I know that that has happened and that they will also have had wider conversations as well. Unfortunately, I can't support the amendment because of it's not deliverable. It would have exactly the counter effect of what the scheme is trying to encourage. And to some extent, it's slightly disappointing. So at the last state sitting, we had my colleagues who I greatly respect for their driving forward the issues of the housing crisis and seeking to raise the profile. We had them at the last States Assembly encouraging members to vote against the population of the Rent Control Tribunal. So that's now gone back for further work. And I fear that we're about to do the same if we accept this amendment. These actions may only be small steps, but they are small steps in the right direction, I believe, and ministers believe as well. So I ask members not to support the amendment. Thank you.
Sir, appropriate time to comment if the adjournment is proposed.
Can I move the adjournment, please?
Well, the adjournment's proposed. The Assembly will reconvene at 2 o'clock.